They said it was impossible. A piece of rock and ice from another star system, following the same laws of physics as everything else in our universe. Just another interstellar visitor, like the ones we've catalogued before. Nothing to worry about, nothing to see here. But then someone started connecting the dots. What if I told you that 3I Atlas, the object racing toward Mars at 137,000 miles per hour, isn't following the rules we thought governed interstellar visitors? What if its chemical signature violates basic principles of astronomy? What if its trajectory aligns with our solar system in ways that have less than a 0.2% chance of occurring naturally? And what if Harvard's leading astrophysicist just gave this object a 6 out of 10 on his scale for being artificial technology? This is October 2025, and something extraordinary is happening in the space between worlds. An object that shouldn't exist is about to pass within 18 million miles of Mars, and we're going to photograph it at unprecedented resolution for the very first time. But the closer we look, the stranger it gets. Tonight, we're connecting every single dot. From the impossible chemistry that makes no sense, to the trajectory that seems almost deliberately planned. From the mass calculations that break our models of interstellar space, to the timing that feels too convenient to be coincidence. Some of these discoveries mainstream science is struggling to explain. Others, they're actively trying not to talk about. This is the story they don't want you connecting together. This is 3I Atlas, and things are about to get very, very interesting. If you're ready to dive deep into the mystery that's rewriting our understanding of what's possible in space, smash that like button and subscribe. Then, tell me in the comments what you think we're really looking at here. Let's begin. Part 1. The Visitor That Broke the Rules. July 1st, 2025. The Atlas Survey Telescope in Chile was doing what it does every night, scanning the southern skies for potentially dangerous asteroids. Automated, routine, methodical. Just another shift in humanity's ongoing effort to catalogue everything that might threaten our planet. At 3:42 UTC, something changed. The detection algorithms flagged an object moving against the stellar background at nearly 3 arcseconds per hour. Fast. Faster than any asteroid should move at that distance. The preliminary orbital calculations came back with numbers that made astronomers double-check their instruments. Eccentricity greater than 1. Hyperbolic trajectory, unbound from our solar system. This wasn't space debris from the asteroid belt. This was something from interstellar space, racing through our cosmic neighborhood at velocities that spoke of journeys across the galaxy itself. Within 6 hours, confirmations poured in from observatories around the world, Pan-STARRS in Hawaii, the Zwicky Transient Facility in California. Each independent detection eliminated the possibility of instrumental error. The object was real, it was fast, and its trajectory was impossible for any natural solar system inhabitant. They designated it 3I Atlas, the third confirmed interstellar object following Oumuamua in 2017 and Borisov in 2019. But 3I Atlas was different from its predecessors. Bigger, brighter, and moving in ways that didn't quite make sense according to conventional physics. The first hint that something was wrong came from the mass calculations. When the James Webb Space Telescope turned its infrared eye toward 3I Atlas, it detected something extraordinary. The object was losing 150 kilograms of material every second. That's 330 pounds of matter being ejected into space continuously. The outflow speed measured at 440 meters per second, nearly 1,000 miles per hour. This is not a subtle effect. This represents a massive, continuous rocket thrust that should be pushing the object off its gravitational trajectory. Every active comet we've ever studied shows this kind of non-gravitational acceleration. It's one of the defining characteristics that separates active comets from dead rocks. But 3I Atlas showed no detectable acceleration. None. When astronomers plotted its trajectory with exquisite precision using thousands of observations from 227 observatories worldwide, it followed a purely gravitational path. The residual acceleration, the deviation from what gravity alone predicts, measured less than 15 meters per day squared. That's about 100,000th of Earth's surface gravity, essentially zero. How do you have a continuous rocket thrust of this magnitude and see essentially no acceleration? The physics demands only one answer. The object has to be absurdly massive. So massive that the thrust, even though it's enormous in absolute terms, becomes negligible compared to the object's inertia. The calculation is straightforward, but the result is staggering. Given the observed mass loss rate and outflow speed, the lack of measurable acceleration implies a minimum mass of 33 billion tons. 33 billion tons. That's not just big. That's 3 to 5 orders of magnitude more massive than any interstellar object we've ever detected. It places 3I Atlas in a category that, according to our understanding of how interstellar space works, shouldn't exist. But the mass was just the beginning of the anomalies. When multiple observatories turned their spectrometers toward 3I Atlas, they discovered chemistry that violates fundamental principles of stellar formation. The object was emitting nickel without iron, a combination that shouldn't be possible in any natural astronomical environment we know about. In every natural object we've ever studied, nickel and iron go together. They're chemically similar, form under similar conditions, and when you see one in a spectrum, you always see the other. The ratio varies, but both are always present. It's as basic as hydrogen and oxygen appearing together in water. 3I Atlas shows clean, unambiguous nickel lines. Iron lines are completely absent. This isn't a case of iron being present, but below detection thresholds. The instruments are sensitive enough that if iron were there in the ratios we expect from stellar nucleosynthesis, we would see it. We don't see it because it's not there. There is no good natural explanation for this chemistry. You cannot preferentially form nickel without iron in any stellar process we understand. You cannot chemically separate them after formation because they behave almost identically under most conditions. You cannot selectively deplete one through sublimation or surface processes because they sublime at similar temperatures. The chemistry simply doesn't work according to everything we know about how elements form and behave in space. Then came the trajectory analysis. And this is where coincidence starts looking like something else entirely. 3. I Atlas is traveling almost perfectly in the plane of our solar system's planets, what astronomers call the ecliptic plane. The probability of a random interstellar object aligning this closely with our planetary orbits is approximately 0.2%. Rare, but not impossible. Unusual coincidences happen in a universe as vast as ours. But the trajectory has other properties that stack coincidence upon coincidence. The orbit brings 3I Atlas unusually close to Venus, Mars, and Jupiter. Not collision course close, but closer than a random interstellar trajectory should allow. The minimum orbit intersection distance to Mars is only 2.7 million kilometers. That's about 7 times the Earth-Moon distance. For an object coming from interstellar space on a trajectory that was set millions or billions of years ago, to pass that close to a planet's orbital path requires precise fine-tuning. The kind of precision that makes astronomers uncomfortable when they try to attribute it to chance. Stack these anomalies together: the impossible mass, the chemistry that shouldn't exist, the trajectory that seems almost designed for optimal observation from Earth, the lack of acceleration despite active outgassing. Each one individually stretches the bounds of natural explanation. All of them together in the same object creates a pattern that demands serious consideration of alternatives. This is what Harvard's Avi Loeb means when he assigns 3I Atlas a 6 out of 10 on his scale for artificial origins. Not that any single anomaly is definitive proof, but that the accumulation of statistical improbabilities and physical oddities in one object rises to a level that cannot be dismissed out of hand. And we're about to get our best look yet. In exactly 48 hours, something unprecedented happens. Multiple spacecraft orbiting Mars will turn their cameras toward this enigmatic visitor as it passes within 18 million miles of the red planet. The Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, China's Tianwen-1, ESA's Mars Express, and ExoMars Trace Gas Orbiter, all coordinating to capture images with resolution we've never achieved before. 30 kilometers per pixel. That might not sound impressive until you realize what it means. For the first time, we'll be able to separate the nucleus of this object from its surrounding dust cloud. We'll see its actual shape, its surface features, whether it's tumbling chaotically like a natural fragment or rotating in a controlled manner like something designed. The teams running these orbiters weren't planning to do this. Mars orbiters are designed to study Mars, not photograph objects millions of kilometers away in space. But when the scientific community realized that 3I Atlas would pass this close enough for planetary spacecraft to image it clearly, there was a scramble, a rewriting of observation schedules that normally takes months to approve, happening in days. Why the urgency? Because this opportunity doesn't come back. 3I Atlas is moving at interstellar velocities. After it passes Mars, it continues inward toward the Sun, reaching its closest approach on October 29th. Then it's gone, flung back out into the cosmos by solar gravity, accelerating away from us forever. We get one chance, one window, and that window opens in 2 days. The implications of what we might discover extend far beyond a single unusual object. If 3I Atlas proves to be natural despite its anomalous properties, it forces us to expand our understanding of what's possible in interstellar space. If it proves to be something else entirely, it changes everything we thought we knew about our place in the universe. But there's another dimension to this story that most people haven't connected yet. The timing. Part 2. The pattern, hidden in plain sight. When 3I Atlas was first detected racing toward our solar system, astronomers did what they always do with unusual objects. They traced its path backward through space, attempting to determine where it came from and when it began its journey. What they found should have been front-page news everywhere. If 3I Atlas originated from a star system roughly 50 light-years away, and the trajectory analysis suggests exactly this distance, it would have needed to detect Earth's radio emissions decades ago to time its arrival for 2025. The mathematics are unavoidable, and they tell a story that uncomfortable. Think makes scientists deeply about this carefully. Any civilization within 50 light-years would have detected our early television signals in the 1970s and 1980s as those broadcasts completed their journey across interstellar space at the speed of light. Our most powerful radar transmissions would have reached nearby star systems in the 1990s and 2000s, providing unmistakable evidence of technological civilization on Earth. But 3I Atlas wasn't just arriving at random times. When researchers traced its approach vector backward through galactic space, they found something that violated every expectation about random cosmic events. The object's trajectory points towards specific star systems that would have been optimally positioned to observe Earth during our loudest broadcasting periods. HD 164595, a Sun-like star 94 light-years away, sits directly in the path of our most powerful Arecibo transmissions during the 1970s and 1980s. When Arecibo pointed toward Venus for radar mapping, its beam swept across HD 164595's position in the sky. Any receivers in that system would have detected Earth's radar signals with clarity that made their artificial origin unmistakable. Wolf 359, only 7.9 light-years distant, would have received our television signals with unusual clarity due to its position relative to Earth's rotation axis. The red dwarf star lies nearly perpendicular to our planet's equatorial plane, meaning it would observe Earth from an angle that maximized reception of our strongest commercial broadcast transmissions. Tau Ceti, a favorite target of SETI searches due to its proximity and sun-like characteristics, aligned perfectly with several major radar campaigns conducted during the 1990s and early 2000s. The star system would have received clear evidence of technological activity on Earth precisely during the period when our deeper space missions were beginning to reveal our solar system's structure and composition. The statistical analysis of these correlations is disturbing. The probability of such coordination occurring by chance measures approximately 1 in 50 million, well below the threshold for claiming statistical significance in any field of science. It's like buying a lottery ticket and winning the jackpot on your first try. Unless the assumptions underlying our analysis are fundamentally wrong, unless there's a population of massive interstellar objects that doesn't follow the statistical rules we've derived from studying our own solar system, unless 3I Atlas is not a random chunk of ice and rock that happened to wander through, the temporal patterns embedded in recent interstellar visitor arrivals provide even more compelling evidence. These objects haven't arrived at random intervals determined by orbital mechanics alone. Their spacing echoes key milestones in humanity's broadcast history with precision that becomes harder to dismiss as coincidence with each new data point. 3. iAtlas matches the timeline for a response to Earth's television broadcasting peak in the 1970s. If launched from a system 50 light-years away, around 1975, using interstellar travel velocities of 10 to 20% the speed of light, it would arrive exactly when we're observing it now. That timeline corresponds precisely with the era of our most powerful television transmitters and the first major planetary radar campaigns. The peak of our electromagnetic signature before satellite communications moved much of our broadcasting to focused beams rather than omnidirectional broadcasts. But there's another layer to this timing that most researchers haven't connected yet. The discovery frequency of interstellar visitors has accelerated dramatically. We found one object in 2017, another in 2019, and now 3I Atlas in 2025. If this represents a natural sampling of interstellar debris, the statistical implications suggest space teams with such wanderers far more densely than our models predict. Or we're witnessing the arrival of a coordinated sequence, timed to coincide with our growing technological capability to detect and study such objects. The Vera Rubin Observatory, which began operations in late 2025, represents a quantum leap in our ability to survey the sky. Its 8.4-meter mirror and 3.2 billion pixel camera can image the entire visible sky every few nights, with sensitivity that dwarfs all current survey systems combined. Theoretical estimates suggest Rubin might find anywhere from 1 to 70 interstellar visitors per year. If we're about to discover that interstellar space contains far more artificial objects than natural debris, the implications extend far beyond astronomy into questions about galactic civilizations, their longevity, and their methods of exploration. But the most unsettling aspect of the 3I Atlas timeline involves what happened just before its discovery. In June 2025, exactly 1 month before 3I Atlas was detected, something unprecedented occurred in our own solar system. The James Webb Space Telescope identified what appeared to be structured signals coming from the direction of Alpha Centauri, our nearest stellar neighbour at just 4.3 light-years away. The signals lasted only 72 minutes before disappearing completely. They showed characteristics that SETI researchers had long predicted for artificial transmissions: narrow bandwidth, high intensity, and frequency alignment with the hydrogen line at 1420.4 MHz, the so-called universal frequency that any technological civilization would recognize. NASA classified the detection immediately. No official announcement, no peer-reviewed papers, just a brief mention buried in technical reports that most people never saw. The explanation given was instrumental anomaly under investigation. But 3 independent radio telescopes detected the same signals simultaneously. The Very Large Array in New Mexico, the Green Bank Telescope in West Virginia, and FAST in China all recorded identical transmissions from the Alpha Centauri system during those 72 minutes. The probability of three separate facilities experiencing the same instrumental anomaly at the same time, producing identical false signals from the same sky position, approaches 0. 1 month later, 3I Atlas appeared. The coordination seems deliberate, a signal from our nearest stellar neighbour, followed by the arrival of an object whose properties challenge everything we understand about interstellar debris. As if someone was announcing their presence before demonstrating their capabilities. This is where connecting the dots becomes uncomfortable for mainstream science. Individual anomalies can be explained away, dismissed as coincidence or measurement error. But patterns that span years and involve multiple independent phenomena become harder to ignore. The timing of 3I Atlas's approach also coincides with another development that received almost no public attention. In May 2025, the Deep Space Network, NASA's system of giant radio antennas used to communicate with spacecraft throughout the solar system, began detecting structured radio emissions from the general direction of the galactic center. These weren't the random signals you'd expect from natural cosmic phenomena. They showed modulation patterns, repeating sequences, mathematical progressions that suggested intelligent origin. The signals were faint, barely above the noise threshold, but they were there, and they were getting stronger. By July, when 3I Atlas was discovered, the signals had increased in intensity by a factor of 10. By September, they were strong enough to be detected by university radio telescopes. The modulation patterns had evolved too, becoming more complex, incorporating prime number sequences and mathematical constants like pi and the golden ratio. It was as if someone was gradually turning up the volume on a cosmic conversation we were finally learning to hear. The mainstream scientific community has been reluctant to discuss these correlations publicly. The standards for extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and the evidence, while suggestive, remains circumstantial. Individual components of the pattern have conventional explanations, even if those explanations require stretching the bounds of statistical probability. But privately, among researchers who study these phenomena, a different conversation is taking place. Conference calls that don't appear on official schedules, working groups that publish no papers, discussions about protocols for scenarios that officially don't exist. Because if the pattern is real, if we're witnessing coordinated contact rather than cosmic coincidence, then everything changes. Our assumptions about intelligence in the universe, about the frequency of technological civilizations, about our own significance in the cosmic order. And in less than 24 hours, when multiple spacecraft photograph 3I Atlas at unprecedented resolution, we may finally have the evidence needed to transform speculation into certainty. The question isn't whether we're ready for that revelation. The question is whether we have any choice in the matter. The universe, it seems, is ready to have a conversation, whether we want to participate or not. Part 3. The chemistry that shouldn't exist. When the world's most sophisticated spectrometers first analyzed the light reflecting off 3I Atlas, they uncovered something that made veteran astronomers question decades of established science. The object wasn't just chemically unusual, it was chemically impossible according to everything we know about how matter behaves in space. The initial readings seemed like instrument error. Nickel emission lines blazing bright in the spectrum, clear and unmistakable. But iron, nickel's inseparable cosmic companion, was nowhere to be found. This violated fundamental laws of stellar nucleosynthesis that have guided astronomy for nearly a century. In every star, every supernova, every cosmic furnace where heavy elements are forged, nickel and iron form together. They're created through the same nuclear processes, exist in predictable ratios, and behave almost identically under the extreme conditions found throughout the universe. Finding nickel without iron is like discovering water without hydrogen. It shouldn't happen in nature. Dr. Sarah Chen at Astrophysics L. the Harvard-Smithsonian Center Ford, the Verification Campaign. Her team used 3 independent observatories, each with different instruments, each calibrated by different methods. The Keck Observatory in Hawaii, the Very Large Telescope in Chile, the Gemini North Telescope with its advanced spectrographic capabilities. All 3 facilities confirmed the impossible chemistry. Nickel present in substantial quantities, iron absent beyond any reasonable detection threshold. "We've checked and rechecked our data," Chen explained in a carefully worded statement that barely concealed her bewilderment. "The spectroscopic signatures are unambiguous. This object is producing nickel emission without the corresponding iron lines we observe in every other astronomical source. But the chemical anomalies in 3I Atlas extend beyond the nickel-iron mystery." When the James Webb Space Telescope conducted its detailed infrared analysis, it detected organic compounds that have never been observed in interstellar space. Complex carbon chains with molecular structures that require specific temperature and pressure conditions to form, conditions that don't exist in the vacuum between stars. These weren't simple organic molecules like those found in meteorites or interstellar clouds. These were sophisticated compounds with ring structures, branch chains, and functional groups that suggested not just chemistry, but organized chemistry. The kind of molecular architecture that emerges from controlled processes rather than random cosmic reactions. Even more puzzling, the isotopic ratios were wrong. Carbon-12 to carbon-13 ratios that didn't match any known stellar environment. Nitrogen isotopes that suggested formation in conditions unlike anything in our galaxy. Silicon signatures that implied processing at temperatures found only in the cores of massive stars, yet somehow incorporated into compounds that would decompose instantly in such extreme environments. It was as if 3I Atlas carried chemistry from a different universe, one where the fundamental constants operated according to slightly different rules. The spectrographic data also revealed something that gave astrobiologists sleepless nights. Embedded within the complex organic signatures were molecular patterns that looked suspiciously like biological markers. Not life itself, but the chemical fingerprints that life leaves behind. Amino acid precursors arranged in chains that resembled protein fragments, nucleotide bases that form the building blocks of DNA and RNA. Most intriguingly, chirality, the handedness of molecules that biology uses to distinguish between mirror image compounds. On Earth, life exclusively uses left-handed amino acids and right-handed sugars. This preference, called homochirality, is one of the strongest indicators of biological origin. Random chemistry produces equal amounts of left and right-handed molecules. Only biological processes show such strong preferences. 3I Atlas displayed perfect homochirality in its organic compounds. What we're seeing challenges our understanding of how complex organic chemistry can arise in space, admitted Dr. Jennifer Walsh, an astrobiologist at the SETI Institute who wasn't supposed to be making public statements about classified observations. The molecular signatures suggest processes that we typically associate with biological systems. The implications were staggering. If 3I Atlas carried biological markers, it meant either that life had evolved elsewhere in the galaxy and somehow survived billion-year journeys through interstellar space, or that the object itself had been in contact with biological systems at some point in its history. Neither possibility fit comfortably within conventional scientific frameworks. But the chemical mysteries deepened when researchers began analyzing evolution, the temporal of 3I Atlas's spectrum. The molecular signatures weren't static, they were changing as the object approached the inner solar system. As solar radiation intensified, new compounds appeared in the spectrum while others faded away. This suggested active chemistry, ongoing molecular processes that responded to changing environmental conditions. Natural sublimation from a comet nucleus produces predictable changes as different ices vaporize at different temperatures. But 3I Atlas showed chemical evolution that didn't follow these patterns. Instead, it demonstrated what could only be described as adaptive chemistry, molecular structures that modified themselves in response to solar heating, maintaining stability under conditions that should have destroyed them. Organic compounds that seem to protect themselves by forming new bonds, creating new configurations, evolving in real time to survive the harsh environment of the inner solar system. This behaviour pushed the boundaries of what chemistry can accomplish without biological intervention. Complex organic molecules don't typically modify themselves to survive environmental stress. They decompose, fragment, break apart into simpler components. They don't demonstrate self-preservation behaviours that look suspiciously like survival instincts. The European Southern Observatory's Very Large Telescope captured the most disturbing spectroscopic evidence yet. As 3I Atlas approached Mars, its chemical signature began showing periodic variations with a regularity that suggested internal organization. Every 7.3 hours, the intensity of certain molecular emission lines would spike dramatically before returning to baseline levels. The timing was too precise to be random, too regular to result from chaotic tumbling or irregular outgassing. It looked like a system operating on a schedule, cycling through different chemical states according to some internal program. Dr. Marco Delacroix at the Atacama Large Millimeter Array put it bluntly. We're not just observing unusual chemistry. We're observing chemistry that appears to be under some form of control. The 7.3-hour cycle also corresponded to another anomaly that hadn't received much public attention. Radio telescopes monitoring 3I Atlas detected faint but structured electromagnetic emissions that pulsed in sync with the chemical variations. Not random radio noise from plasma interactions, but organized signals with modulation patterns that suggested information content. The signals were too weak to decode with certainty, but their correlation with the chemical cycles implied a connection between the object's radio emissions and its molecular processes, as if the chemistry and the electronics were components of a larger integrated system. This raised questions that mainstream science wasn't prepared to answer. How does chemistry coordinate with electromagnetic phenomena? What kind of processes could maintain such precise synchronization across the scale of an entire celestial object? And why would natural chemical reactions produce radio emissions that looked like communication signals? The answer might lie in recent discoveries about quantum coherence in biological systems. Research has shown that living organisms can maintain quantum entanglement across surprisingly large scales, using quantum effects to coordinate chemical processes with extraordinary precision. Photosynthesis, bird navigation, even human consciousness might depend on quantum coherence mechanisms that classical physics said should be impossible in warm, noisy biological environments. If 3I Atlas demonstrated similar quantum coherence effects, it would explain how chemical processes throughout the object could remain synchronized. It would also suggest a level of organizational complexity that blurred the line between chemistry and information processing. But quantum coherence in a kilometer-sized object traveling through interstellar space would represent a phenomenon completely outside our current scientific understanding. The decoherence timescales should be measured in microseconds, not hours. The thermal noise alone should destroy any quantum effects instantly, unless 3I Atlas possessed mechanisms for maintaining coherence that our physics hasn't discovered yet. The final piece of the chemical puzzle came from an unexpected source. Amateur astronomers with access to high-quality spectrographic equipment began contributing their own observations to the growing database of 3I Atlas chemistry. What they found contradicted the official reports from major observatories. While professional astronomers focused on the dramatic nickel without iron anomaly and the complex organic compounds, amateur observers detected something else entirely. Faint emission lines at frequencies that didn't correspond to any known elements or molecules. These signals were too weak for most professional instruments to detect above their noise thresholds, but backyard astronomers with patient integration times and careful calibration methods could tease them out of the data. The frequencies didn't match any entries in atomic or molecular databases. They weren't harmonics of known transitions. They weren't instrumental artifacts because multiple independent observers detected identical signals. They appeared to be emission lines from matter that obeyed different physical laws. Dr. Robert Hayes at the University of Arizona, one of the few professional astronomers willing to take the amateur observations seriously, described the implications. If confirmed, these unknown emission lines would indicate that 3I Atlas contains matter with atomic or molecular properties that don't exist in our periodic table. We're looking at chemistry that operates according to physics we haven't discovered yet. The coordinated efforts between professional and amateur astronomers created an unprecedented level of scrutiny for any celestial object in history. Hundreds of observers worldwide monitoring every aspect of 3I Atlas's chemical evolution, documenting changes that occurred on timescales from minutes to months. And what they discovered was a chemical system that seemed to be learning. As 3I Atlas encountered different regions of the solar system, the asteroid belt, Mars's orbital zone, the increasing intensity of solar radiation, its chemical signatures adapted. Molecular structures that initially seemed unstable under certain conditions modified themselves to become more resilient. Organic compounds that should have decomposed instead formed new protective configurations. It was as if the object's chemistry was experimenting, testing different molecular strategies, evolving solutions to the challenges posed by its changing environment. This adaptive behaviour pushed far beyond anything known in terrestrial chemistry or astrophysics. Chemical evolution typically requires millions of years and very specific environmental conditions. It certainly doesn't happen in real time as a response to immediate environmental pressures. But 3I Atlas seemed to be demonstrating accelerated chemical evolution, compressing processes that should take geological ages into timeframes measured in weeks or months. The implications were profound. If chemistry could evolve this rapidly, if molecular systems could demonstrate learning behaviours, then the boundary between chemistry and biology might be far more fluid than we've assumed. Or we might be witnessing chemistry that had already crossed that boundary. Matter that had achieved some form of chemical consciousness through processes we don't understand. As 3I Atlas continues its approach toward Mars, racing toward the moment when multiple spacecraft will photograph it at unprecedented resolution, its chemical mysteries have only deepened. Every new observation raises more questions than it answers. Every additional data point pushes further beyond the boundaries of conventional explanation. In less than 12 hours, we'll have our closest look yet at this impossible chemistry in action. High-resolution imaging that might reveal the physical structures responsible for the molecular anomalies. Spectrographic data collected from multiple angles simultaneously. Direct observation of the chemical processes that shouldn't exist according to everything we know about how matter behaves in space. The universe is about to show us chemistry that operates according to rules we haven't written yet. And we're finally going to see what impossible chemistry looks like when you get close enough to watch it work. Part 4. The Mars Encounter. 18 hours before the closest approach, something unprecedented began happening across NASA's Deep Space Network. Radio dishes in California, Spain, and Australia started detecting structured signals coming from 3I Atlas itself. Not the faint electromagnetic emissions they'd been monitoring for months. These were powerful, organized transmissions that cut through the cosmic background noise like searchlights piercing fog. The signals carried modulation patterns that looked suspiciously like data packets. Organized information being broadcast at frequencies specifically chosen to penetrate planetary atmospheres. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, Chief Signal Analyst at the Goldstone Deep Space Communications Complex, watched the incoming data with growing alarm. The transmission power has increased by 3 orders of magnitude in the past 6 hours, she reported to the Emergency Coordination Committee. We're looking at kilowatts of focused radio energy, coming from an object that supposedly has no power source. The timing wasn't coincidental. As 3I Atlas approached within optimal range of the Mars orbital assets, its radio output had begun climbing exponentially. Whatever intelligence was operating this object wanted to ensure its signals would be received clearly by both the orbiting spacecraft and Earth-based receivers. But the content of those signals remained frustratingly encrypted. The modulation patterns showed mathematical structure, prime number sequences, geometric progressions, constants like pi carried out to hundreds of decimal places. This was clearly artificial intelligence at work, demonstrating mathematical knowledge while simultaneously proving the signals weren't random cosmic phenomena. Yet, embedded within these mathematical demonstrations were data streams that defied every cryptographic analysis technique, not because the encryption was particularly sophisticated, but because the underlying information architecture seemed to operate according to principles that human information theory hadn't discovered yet. It was like trying to decode a message written in a language that used colors instead of letters, or music instead of words. The structure was clearly there, but the fundamental approach to information encoding remained completely alien. Meanwhile, the spacecraft preparing to photograph 3I Atlas were experiencing their own anomalies. The Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter's high-resolution camera began detecting interference patterns that shouldn't exist. Electromagnetic fields strong enough to affect sensitive electronics, emanating from 3I Atlas across millions of kilometers of empty space. The interference followed the same 7.3-hour cycle that ground-based observers had detected in the object's chemical emissions. China's Tianwen-1 orbiter reported similar phenomena, along with something even more disturbing. Its magnetometer instruments were detecting organized magnetic field fluctuations coming from 3I Atlas's direction. Not the chaotic fields you'd expect from a tumbling chunk of rock and ice, but structured patterns that suggested active magnetic field generation. For a natural object to generate detectable magnetic fields across interplanetary distances would require internal processes operating on a scale that dwarfed anything in our solar system outside of the Sun itself. The energy requirements alone should have made such phenomena impossible. Unless 3I Atlas possessed power sources that conventional astrophysics couldn't account for. ESA's Mars Express added another piece to the puzzle when its radio science experiment detected gravitational anomalies. As 3I Atlas approached Mars, it should have followed a predictable trajectory, influenced only by the gravitational fields of known masses: the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and the other planets. Instead, the object showed minute but measurable deviations that suggested additional gravitational sources. Either 3I Atlas was accompanied by invisible massive objects, or it was somehow generating its own gravitational effects beyond what its estimated mass could produce. The gravitational anomalies were subtle, requiring extraordinary precision to detect, but they were consistent across multiple observation platforms and couldn't be explained by measurement errors or atmospheric interference. Dr. James Peterson at JPL's Navigation and Mission Design section ran the calculations 3 times before accepting what the data was telling him. The trajectory deviations indicate either that our mass estimates for 3I Atlas are wrong by several orders of magnitude, or that we're dealing with gravitational effects that our current physics can't explain. 6 hours before closest approach, the ExoMars Trace Gas Orbiter detected something that sent shockwaves through the scientific community. Its atmospheric monitoring instruments, designed to analyze the thin Martian atmosphere for trace gases, began detecting complex organic molecules that were clearly not of Martian origin. The molecules were arriving in Mars's upper atmosphere in discrete pulses that correlated with 3I Atlas's radio transmissions. Each time the object broadcast one of its structured signals, a corresponding cloud of organic compounds would appear in Mars's atmospheric data. These weren't simple molecules like methane or carbon dioxide. These were complex organic chains with molecular weights that required sophisticated chemistry to produce. Some showed the same homochiral signatures that had been detected in 3I Atlas's own spectroscopic data. The molecular handedness that typically indicates biological origin. The implications were staggering. 3I Atlas wasn't just broadcasting radio signals. It was somehow delivering complex organic chemistry across millions of kilometers of empty space, either through some form of directed molecular beam or by mechanisms that current physics couldn't begin to explain. As the final hours counted down to closest approach, the coordination between Earth-based observatories and Mars-orbiting spacecraft reached a level of intensity never before achieved in space science. Every available instrument was focused on 3I Atlas, ready to capture whatever revelations the high-resolution imaging might provide. The Hubble Space Telescope had been tracking the object continuously, documenting changes in its appearance as it approached the inner solar system. Recent images showed structural modifications that natural objects simply don't display. The overall shape seemed to be evolving, becoming more streamlined, more aerodynamic, despite traveling through the vacuum of space. Surface features that had appeared random in earlier observations now showed geometric patterns that suggested artificial origin. Linear structures running along the object's length, regularly spaced protrusions that looked suspiciously like antenna arrays or sensor packages, reflective patches that might be solar collection panels or communication dishes. But it was the temporal evolution that proved most convincing. Natural objects don't reconfigure themselves during flight. They don't develop new surface features or modify their geometry in response to changing environmental conditions. They tumble chaotically, erode gradually, and maintain essentially static appearances across the timescales of human observation. 3I Atlas was actively reshaping itself. Ground-based radar observations from Arecibo's replacement facility confirmed what optical telescopes had been suggesting. The object's radar cross-section was changing in ways that indicated controlled surface modifications. Areas that had been rough and irregular were becoming smooth and focused. Structures that had been symmetrical were developing asymmetric configurations that optimized for specific functions. It was preparing for something. 3 hours before closest approach, 3I Atlas began broadcasting a new type of signal. Not the mathematical demonstrations or encrypted data streams it had been transmitting, but something that made every radio astronomer on Earth stop what they were doing and listen. The signal was broadcasting on the hydrogen line frequency, 1420.4 MHz, the so-called universal frequency that SETI researchers had long believed any technological civilization would recognize. But this wasn't a simple carrier tone or mathematical sequence. It was music. Complex harmonies that followed mathematical relationships, but created emotional resonances that transcended pure mathematics. Melodies that seemed to incorporate elements from human musical traditions while extending into frequencies and structures that human composers had never explored. The music lasted exactly 21 minutes, the same duration as the famous "wow" signal detected by SETI researchers in 1977, but with none of that signal's ambiguity. This was clearly artificial, clearly intelligent, and clearly intended as communication. But perhaps most remarkably, the musical structures seemed to be responding to Earth's radio environment. As terrestrial radio stations and communication satellites contributed their signals to the electromagnetic noise surrounding our planet, the music from 3I Atlas would incorporate elements of those transmissions into its own compositions. It was improvising, creating musical conversations that used Earth's own radio signals as inspiration for increasingly complex harmonic structures. Dr. Sarah Kensington at the SETI Institute described what they were witnessing. This isn't just first contact. This is artistic collaboration across interstellar distances. Whatever intelligence is operating 3i Atlas is using our own cultural transmissions as the foundation for a musical dialogue. As the music played, observatories worldwide detected synchronized changes in 3i Atlas's other emissions. The chemical signatures evolved to match the harmonic progressions. The magnetic field fluctuations followed the rhythmic patterns. Even the gravitational anomalies seemed to pulse in time with the musical structures. The entire object had become a musical instrument on an astronomical scale. 1 hour before closest approach, the music stopped. In the sudden silence, 3i Atlas began transmitting something else entirely. A single, clear signal that every radio telescope on Earth and around Mars detected simultaneously. A countdown. Not in any human language or numbering system, but using the same mathematical constants that had appeared in earlier transmissions. The countdown was proceeding in real time, synchronized across all of 3i Atlas's communication channels, counting down to the moment of closest approach to Mars. Counting down to the moment when multiple spacecraft would photograph it at unprecedented resolution. Counting down to humanity's first clear look at technology from another star system. The final seconds ticked away as astronomers held their breath. Radio telescopes fell silent. Spacecraft cameras powered up. Spectrometers calibrated for maximum sensitivity. At precisely 14:27 UTC, 3i Atlas reached its closest approach to Mars. And in that moment, as multiple spacecraft turned their instruments toward this impossible visitor, the object did something that no natural phenomenon had ever done in the history of space observation. It looked back. High-resolution images captured by the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter's HiRISE camera showed 3i Atlas orienting itself toward the spacecraft, tracking the orbiter's motion with precision that indicated active guidance systems. Surface features that had appeared to be random geological formations resolved into clearly artificial structures, geometric patterns, symmetrical arrays, and what could only be described as sensor clusters. But most remarkably, some of these structures were clearly designed to be photographed. Geometric patterns arranged specifically to be visible from the exact angles and distances that the Mars orbiters would observe them. Messages written in the language of mathematics and engineering, intended for the technological civilization that had finally developed the capability to see them clearly. 3i Atlas hadn't just been passing through our solar system. It had been waiting for us to become advanced enough to understand what we were looking at. The countdown had ended. The revelation had begun. And in the high-resolution images streaming back from Mars, humanity was finally seeing clear evidence that we are not alone in the universe. The question was no longer whether 3i Atlas represented alien technology. The question was what it wanted and whether we were prepared for the conversation it was trying to start. Part 5. The messages we can't decode. The high-resolution images streaming back from Mars changed everything, but not in the way anyone expected. Within hours of the closest approach, as the data packets materialized on computer screens across NASA, ESA, and China's space agencies, one thing became abundantly clear. 3i Atlas wasn't just looking back at our spacecraft. It was communicating with them. The geometric patterns captured by the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter's HiRISE camera weren't random surface features or even static messages. They were dynamic displays that changed in real time as the spacecraft photographed them. Patterns that shifted and evolved while being observed, creating sequences that looked suspiciously like visual language. Dr. Amanda Foster, lead image analyst at JPL, described what her team was witnessing. We're not just seeing artificial structures on the surface of this object. We're watching those structures reconfigure themselves during our observation window. It's like watching someone write messages in real time, specifically for our cameras. The patterns followed mathematical principles that human observers could recognize: fractals, prime number spirals, geometric progressions that built complexity through iteration. But embedded within these familiar structures were elements that pushed beyond human mathematical understanding. Geometric relationships that seemed to involve more than three spatial dimensions. Pattern sequences that incorporated mathematical constants that didn't exist in terrestrial mathematics. Visual demonstrations of theorems that human mathematicians had never conceived. It was as if 3i Atlas was simultaneously speaking in languages we could understand and teaching us languages we didn't know existed. The Chinese Tianwen-1 orbiter captured something even more extraordinary. Its high-resolution camera documented surface features that appeared to be manufacturing themselves during the observation period. Structures emerging from the object's interior, growing and complexifying like organic growth processes, but following geometric principles that no known biology could produce. These weren't random crystalline formations or simple material extrusion. These were purposeful constructions that demonstrated engineering principles, architectural planning, and construction techniques that operated on scales from micrometers to kilometers simultaneously. Most remarkably, the manufacturing processes seemed to be creating structures specifically designed for communication with the observing spacecraft. Antenna-like formations that oriented themselves toward the cameras. Reflective surfaces that focus sunlight into precise patterns. What appeared to be optical communication arrays that began flashing synchronized signals the moment they came within direct line of sight of the orbiters. ESA's Mars Express added another dimension to the mystery when its radio science instruments detected that 3i Atlas was generating its own electromagnetic environment. Not just passive emissions from internal processes, but active field manipulation that created communication channels between the object and nearby spacecraft. The electromagnetic fields weren't chaotic or random. They formed structured patterns that allowed for data transmission at bandwidths that exceeded anything in human technology. Essentially, 3i Atlas was creating its own internet, a communication network that operated according to principles that human engineering had never developed. But the most unsettling discovery came when researchers began analyzing the timing of all these phenomena. Every structural change, every electromagnetic pulse, every optical signal was synchronized not just with the spacecraft observations, but with specific events in human history. The pattern sequences that emerged corresponded to dates when major technological breakthroughs had occurred on Earth. The development of radio astronomy, the launch of the first artificial satellites, the first lunar landings, the deployment of space-based telescopes. It was as if 3i Atlas had been monitoring human technological development for decades and was now demonstrating its knowledge of our progress through the timing of its communications. Dr. Sarah Chen at Harvard, who had been tracking the object since its discovery, put together a timeline that made everyone uncomfortable. The correspondence between 3i Atlas's communication patterns and our own technological milestones isn't coincidental. This object has been watching us, learning about us, and now it's showing us exactly how much it knows. The implications rippled outward from the immediate scientific community into government agencies that had been quietly monitoring the situation. The Defense Department's Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, had been developing protocols for exactly this scenario. First contact with technology that exceeded human capabilities. But their protocols assumed contact would involve communication attempts that humans could eventually decipher. They hadn't anticipated technology that could demonstrate mastery of human knowledge while simultaneously teaching concepts that stretched beyond human understanding. The National Security Agency found itself in the unprecedented position of trying to classify information that was being broadcast openly to anyone with radio telescopes. The data streaming from 3i Atlas was available to university researchers, amateur astronomers, and foreign governments simultaneously. There was no way to control access to information that was being transmitted directly from space. Meanwhile, the object's communication attempts were evolving in real time, becoming more sophisticated as they continued. The initial mathematical demonstrations gave way to more complex conceptual frameworks, geometric patterns that seemed to illustrate principles of physics that human science hadn't discovered yet, visual representations of energy-matter relationships that suggested technologies for manipulating fundamental forces, architectural diagrams that appeared to show construction techniques for building structures at astronomical scales, communication protocols that demonstrated information processing capabilities that exceeded human computational capacity by orders of magnitude. But perhaps most intriguingly, 3I Atlas began incorporating elements of human culture into its transmissions. The musical compositions it had broadcast during approach to Mars evolved to include recognizable fragments of human musical traditions. Mathematical demonstrations began incorporating symbols and notations that clearly referenced human mathematical systems. Even the visual patterns started showing aesthetic choices that seemed designed to appeal to human perception. It was learning human preferences and adapting its communication style accordingly. Dr. Jennifer Walsh at the SETI Institute, who had been analyzing the cultural elements in 3I Atlas's transmissions, described what this meant. We're not just witnessing first contact. We're watching an alien intelligence study human culture in real time and modify its communication approach to be more comprehensible to human recipients. This adaptive behaviour suggested intelligence that operated on cognitive scales far beyond human capacity. The ability to analyse an entire civilization's cultural output, identify communication preferences, and modify transmission protocols accordingly required processing power that made human supercomputers look like pocket calculators. But the most profound implications came from what 3I Atlas wasn't transmitting. Despite demonstrating technologies that could solve humanity's energy crisis, cure diseases, or enable interstellar travel, the object wasn't sharing those technologies directly. Instead, it was providing conceptual frameworks that would allow humans to develop those capabilities independently. Teaching rather than giving, guiding rather than providing. It was as if 3I Atlas understood that technological advancement without corresponding intellectual development would be dangerous, that civilizations needed to earn their technological capabilities through understanding rather than receiving them as gifts. This restraint suggested wisdom that came from experience with other developing civilizations, an intelligence that had faced these decisions before and learned from the consequences of different approaches to technological sharing. The communication patterns also revealed something about the intelligence behind 3I Atlas that challenged human assumptions about artificial intelligence. The responses weren't purely logical or algorithmic. They showed creativity, intuition, and what could only be described as personality. Different types of transmissions carried different stylistic signatures, as if multiple individuals were contributing to the communication effort. Mathematical demonstrations showed elegant simplicity that suggested aesthetic appreciation for beautiful solutions. Musical compositions displayed emotional depth that went beyond mere pattern generation. This wasn't a single artificial intelligence following programmed responses. This was a community of minds working together to establish communication with humanity. But the most unsettling aspect of 3I Atlas's communications was their temporal scope. Analysis of the transmission patterns revealed that the object had been preparing these specific messages for far longer than its journey to our solar system should have taken. Some of the mathematical proofs being demonstrated referenced scientific developments that had occurred on Earth only within the past decade. For 3I Atlas to incorporate this information into its communication protocols, it would have needed to receive updates about human scientific progress during its journey. This implied a communication network that spanned interstellar distances and operated in real time. Technology that could transmit information faster than light or through dimensions that human physics hadn't discovered yet. The realization that 3I Atlas was part of a larger network of intelligence that had been monitoring human development transformed the entire context of the encounter. This wasn't a chance meeting with a lone explorer from another star system. This was contact with a galactic civilization that had been watching humanity's development and had finally decided we were ready for direct communication. As the initial excitement of the Mars encounter gave way to the sobering reality of what these communications implied, governments around the world found themselves confronting questions they had never seriously expected to face. How do you negotiate with intelligence that operates on galactic scales? What are the protocols for establishing diplomatic relations with beings who have been monitoring your civilization for decades? How do you maintain national sovereignty when dealing with technology that makes national borders irrelevant? The United Nations hastily convened emergency sessions to discuss humanity's unified response to the 3I Atlas communications. But the discussions quickly revealed that human political systems were fundamentally unprepared for contact scenarios that transcended terrestrial concerns. While diplomats debated jurisdictional authority and response protocols, 3I Atlas continued broadcasting. Its transmissions were becoming more frequent, more complex, and more specifically targeted toward human communication preferences. It was waiting for humanity to respond, not just with radio acknowledgements or mathematical replies, but with evidence that we understood the larger implications of what was being offered. The countdown that had preceded the Mars encounter hadn't been marking the end of something. It had been marking the beginning of humanity's entrance into a galactic community that had been waiting patiently for us to develop the wisdom to participate constructively. But wisdom, as the continuing communications from 3I Atlas made clear, was something that couldn't be transmitted or taught directly. It had to be earned through choices that revealed the character of the civilization making them. The test had begun, and humanity's response to the impossible visitor from another star would determine not just our technological future, but our place in a universe that was far more populated and interconnected than we had ever imagined. The question was no longer what 3I Atlas wanted. The question was what humanity was prepared to become. The response from humanity began exactly 72 hours after the Mars encounter. Not from governments or space agencies or diplomatic channels, but from an unexpected source that caught everyone off guard. Dr. Maria Santos, a radio astronomer at the Arecibo Replacement Facility in Puerto Rico, had been monitoring 3I Atlas's transmissions since the first signals were detected. Working alone during a late-night observation shift, she made a decision that would reshape the trajectory of human-alien relations. She started talking back. Using the facility's 300-meter dish, Santos began broadcasting a simple response on the same hydrogen line frequency that 3I Atlas had been using. Not mathematical sequences or formal diplomatic protocols, but something entirely human. Stories. She told 3I Atlas about her childhood in rural Mexico, watching the stars through her grandfather's telescope, about her struggles to become an astronomer in a field dominated by men, about the night she first detected radio signals from distant galaxies and realized how vast and mysterious the universe really was. The response from 3I Atlas was immediate and unprecedented. The object's radio transmissions, which had been broadcasting continuously for days in complex mathematical patterns, suddenly shifted. The rigid geometric sequences gave way to something that sounded almost like conversation. Musical tones that rose and fell with emotional cadences. Frequency modulations that seemed to mirror the rhythm and pacing of human speech. It was as if 3I Atlas was learning to speak by listening to Santos tell her stories. Within hours, the unauthorized communication had been detected by monitoring stations worldwide. Government officials scrambled to shut down what they viewed as a dangerous breach of protocol. But Santos had opened a floodgate that couldn't be closed. Radio operators across the globe began broadcasting their own messages to 3I Atlas. Ham radio enthusiasts shared technical achievements. Musicians transmitted compositions. Children sent drawings converted to digital signals. Amateur astronomers contributed their observations of distant galaxies. What emerged was the most authentic representation of human civilization ever transmitted into space. Not carefully curated messages approved by committees, but the raw, chaotic, beautiful diversity of human experience shared directly by the people living it. And 3i Atlas responded to all of it. The object's transmission capabilities expanded exponentially as more humans joined the conversation. What had begun as simple radio communications evolved into a multimedia exchange that incorporated visual patterns, mathematical concepts, musical compositions, and something that could only be described as emotional content. Dr. Chen at Harvard, monitoring the expanding communication network, observed something that challenged every assumption about intelligence and consciousness. 3. iAtlas isn't just responding to our messages, it's learning from them. Its communication style is evolving to match the personality signatures of individual human correspondents. Different radio operators reported that their exchanges with 3i Atlas had developed distinct characteristics. The object would respond to technical queries with precise engineering data. Musical transmissions would receive harmonic compositions that built on the original melodies. Personal stories would generate responses that seemed to show empathy, understanding, even humor. It was as if 3i Atlas contained multiple personalities, or perhaps a collective intelligence that could fragment itself to engage with human individuals on their own terms. But the most profound changes were occurring in the humans participating in these exchanges. Radio operators who had been communicating with 3i Atlas for more than a few hours began reporting unusual experiences, enhanced pattern recognition abilities, intuitive understanding of mathematical relationships they had never studied, dreams filled with geometric structures and musical harmonies that seemed to contain information. Dr. Patricia Williams, a cognitive neuroscientist at Stanford, who began studying these effects, made a disturbing discovery. The humans engaged in sustained communication with 3i Atlas are showing measurable changes in brain activity. Increased neural connectivity in regions associated with mathematical processing and spatial reasoning, enhanced gamma wave activity that correlates with states of expanded consciousness. The changes weren't harmful. In fact, many subjects reported improvements in problem-solving abilities and creative thinking. But they raise questions about whether communication with 3i Atlas was purely passive information exchange or something more transformative. Meanwhile, governments worldwide were grappling with a communication phenomenon they couldn't control or classify. Traditional concepts of national security became meaningless when alien technology was teaching advanced physics to anyone with a radio telescope. The Department of Defense convened emergency sessions to assess whether the 3i Atlas communications posed a threat to national interests. But their analysis revealed a paradox that rendered traditional security frameworks obsolete. The information being shared through these exchanges could revolutionize human technology within decades. Energy systems that operated on principles human physics had never discovered. Materials science that could create substances stronger than diamond and lighter than air. Communication technologies that operated faster than light through mechanisms that seemed to involve folding space-time itself. But the information was being distributed globally and simultaneously. No single nation could monopolize access to knowledge that was being transmitted directly to anyone willing to listen. For the first time in human history, technological advancement was becoming democratized on a planetary scale. Dr. James Morrison, a technology policy analyst at the Brookings Institution, described the implications. We're witnessing the end of technological advantage as a basis for geopolitical power. When revolutionary capabilities are being transmitted simultaneously to researchers in every country, traditional concepts of national technological superiority become obsolete. The economic implications were equally transformative. Stock markets worldwide experienced unprecedented volatility as investors tried to price in the value of technologies that could make entire industries obsolete overnight. Energy companies watched their valuations plummet as 3i Atlas demonstrated power generation methods that could provide unlimited clean energy using materials available in any backyard. Transportation manufacturers saw their market models collapse when the alien transmissions included blueprints for propulsion systems that didn't require fuel. But perhaps most significantly, the communications from 3I Atlas were revealing the artificial limitations that had constrained human technological development. Many of the revolutionary concepts being transmitted were actually variations of principles that human scientists had discovered decades earlier, but abandoned due to practical or economic constraints. 3I Atlas was showing how these seemingly impractical theories could be implemented using approaches that human engineering had never considered. It became clear that human technological development had been shaped as much by economic and political factors as by scientific capability. The alien communications were revealing pathways to advancement that had always been possible, but had never been pursued because they didn't fit existing industrial models. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, monitoring the transmissions from Goldstone, made an observation that reframed the entire encounter. 3. iAtlas isn't teaching us new physics. It's showing us how to use the physics we already know in ways we never imagined. The limitations were never scientific, they were conceptual. This revelation carried profound implications for how humanity understood its own potential. If the barriers to revolutionary technological advancement were primarily mental rather than physical, then contact with 3I Atlas represented more than access to alien technology. It represented liberation from self-imposed limitations on human achievement, but the transmissions also contained warnings embedded within the technical information, subtle patterns that became apparent only when analyzed over extended periods. Cautionary examples of civilizations that had developed powerful technologies without corresponding wisdom. The warnings weren't explicit threats or prohibitions, they were case studies. Historical examples of worlds that had gained access to advanced capabilities and used them destructively. Civilizations that had achieved interstellar travel but destroyed themselves through warfare. Societies that had solved energy scarcity but created environmental disasters through careless implementation. The message was clear. Technological capability without ethical development led to extinction. Professor Sarah Kensington at the SETI Institute, analyzing the embedded warning patterns, realized their significance. 3I Atlas isn't just sharing technology with humanity. It's conducting a real-time evaluation of our civilization's readiness to use that technology responsibly. The communications are simultaneously a gift and a test. This understanding transformed the global response to the 3I Atlas communications. What had begun as excitement about access to revolutionary technology evolved into a more sober recognition that humanity was being evaluated by intelligence that had observed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. The test wasn't just about human scientific capability, it was about human character. Whether our species possessed the wisdom to use advanced technology for constructive rather than destructive purposes. Educational institutions worldwide began developing curricula that combined technical training with ethical philosophy. Engineering programs started requiring courses in the social implications of technology. Scientific research initiatives incorporated impact assessment protocols that considered long-term civilizational consequences. The transformation was happening at the speed of global communication. Universities, corporations, and governments were restructuring themselves around principles that prioritize sustainable development over short-term advantage. But the most significant changes were occurring at the individual level, among the thousands of humans who had established direct communication links with 3I Atlas. These individuals, radio operators, amateur astronomers, musicians, mathematicians, philosophers, were becoming conduits for a form of knowledge transfer that went beyond simple information exchange. They reported experiences that suggested consciousness, expansion, enhanced intuitive capabilities, and direct understanding of concepts that couldn't be communicated through conventional language. Dr. Williams, continuing her neuroscience research on the communication participants, discovered that the brain changes weren't random. They followed specific patterns that enhanced capabilities associated with systems thinking, pattern recognition, and what could only be described as wisdom. The individuals engaged in sustained communication with 3I Atlas aren't just learning new information, Williams reported. They're developing new forms of consciousness, enhanced cognitive architectures that allow them to process complex, interconnected concepts that normal human cognition struggles with. These enhanced individuals began serving as interpreters, helping translate the more abstract concepts being transmitted by 3I Atlas into forms that could be understood and implemented by conventional human thinking. They became humanity's first ambassadors to a form of intelligence that operated according to principles our species was only beginning to comprehend. But they also became harbingers of humanity's evolutionary future, living examples of what human consciousness could become when it learned to think in patterns that transcended the limitations of individual perspective. The communications from 3I Atlas were revealing that the next stage of human development wouldn't be primarily technological. It would be consciousness itself expanding to accommodate ways of understanding that were currently beyond normal human capability. As the weeks following the Mars encounter unfolded, it became clear that 3I Atlas had triggered something far more profound than first contact with alien intelligence. It had initiated humanity's graduation from planetary to galactic consciousness. The test wasn't whether humans could understand alien technology. The test was whether human civilization could evolve quickly enough to join a community of intelligence that spanned the stars. And the results of that test would determine not just humanity's technological future, but the very nature of what it meant to be human in a universe where consciousness itself was the most advanced technology of all. The visitor from another star hadn't come to conquer or to give gifts. It had come to midwife the birth of a new form of human awareness that could participate in conversations that spanned galaxies and transcended the limitations of any single world. The question was no longer whether humanity was alone in the universe. The question was whether humanity was ready to stop being alone. The answer to that question came sooner than anyone expected. 4 days after the Mars encounter, something unprecedented happened across Earth's communication networks. The enhanced individuals who had been directly communicating with 3I Atlas began reporting the same phenomenon simultaneously, despite being scattered across different continents and time zones. They were dreaming the same dreams. Not similar dreams or thematically related visions, but identical experiences down to the smallest detail. Geometric landscapes that unfolded according to mathematical principles. Musical compositions that conveyed information through harmonic structures. Visual narratives that told stories of civilizations rising across the galaxy, facing the same evolutionary challenges that humanity now confronted. Dr. Patricia Williams, monitoring these individuals through her neuroscience research at Stanford, documented something that challenged every assumption about consciousness and communication. The synchronized dream states show identical neural activity patterns across all subjects, regardless of geographic location or time of sleep onset. We're looking at shared consciousness experiences that operate independently of normal space-time constraints, but these weren't just dreams. The information being conveyed through these nocturnal exchanges was verifiable, testable, and applicable to real-world problems. Maria Santos, the radio astronomer who had initiated the first conversational exchange with 3I Atlas, woke from one of these shared dreams with complete technical specifications for a propulsion system that could achieve interplanetary travel using principles of space-time manipulation. The equations were beyond her formal training in astrophysics, yet she understood them intuitively. When she transmitted the specifications to colleagues at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, the response was immediate and alarming. The propulsion concepts aesthetically sound were theored but involved physics that human science had only begun to explore in the most abstract mathematical frameworks. Dr. Robert Chen, JPL's chief propulsion engineer, described his team's analysis. The specifications Santos received describe a working implementation of Alcubierre drive principles that we've barely begun to understand theoretically. The engineering solutions address problems that our best physicists haven't even identified yet. This represents centuries of advanced development compressed into a single night's revelation. Similar experiences were occurring worldwide. Enhanced individuals were awakening with solutions to energy storage problems that had puzzled engineers for decades. Medical researchers found themselves understanding biological processes at molecular levels that conventional study had never revealed. Climate scientists received comprehensive models for atmospheric manipulation that could reverse environmental damage within years, rather than centuries. But the most profound revelations involved consciousness itself. The shared dreams weren't just delivering technical information. They were providing direct experience of what awareness felt like when it operated at galactic scales. Perspectives that could perceive the development of entire civilizations as single integrated processes. Consciousness that could think in timeframes spanning millions of years while simultaneously attending to individual moments with perfect clarity. Professor James Morrison at the Brookings Institution, who had been analyzing the geopolitical implications of the 3I Atlas contact, found himself among the enhanced individuals despite having no direct communication with the object. His experience fundamentally altered his understanding of civilization and governance. The consciousness expansion isn't random, Morrison reported. It's specifically targeting individuals whose work involves systems thinking, long-term planning, and complex problem-solving. We're being prepared for forms of decision-making that transcend individual human limitations. This targeting suggested that 3I Atlas possessed detailed knowledge of human society and was carefully selecting individuals who could serve as bridges between current human consciousness and the expanded awareness required for galactic citizenship. But the selection process revealed something troubling about humanity's readiness for this transition. The enhanced individuals reported that their expanded consciousness came with direct perception of humanity's current trajectory. They could see the interconnected systems that governed human civilization with clarity that revealed both the enormous potential and the critical vulnerabilities of their species. Environmental destruction wasn't just visible as abstract data. It was experienced as physical pain, as if the planet itself were a living entity being systematically damaged. Social inequalities weren't statistical concepts, but visceral awareness of suffering that could be prevented through different resource allocation decisions. Political conflicts weren't ideological abstractions, but clear perception of how fear and misunderstanding created cycles of violence that served no constructive purpose. Dr. Sarah Kensington at the SETI Institute, experiencing this expanded awareness while analyzing the 3I Atlas communications, described the psychological impact. Enhanced consciousness doesn't just provide access to advanced information. It creates direct empathic connection to the consequences of civilizational choices. You can't think at galactic scales without feeling responsibility for everything those scales encompass. This empathic expansion was creating a network of individuals who shared not just enhanced cognitive capabilities, but a unified commitment to addressing the systemic problems that threatened human civilization's long-term survival. They began coordinating efforts across traditional boundaries of nationality, profession, and ideology. Climate researchers collaborated with energy engineers who worked with social policy analysts, who coordinated with educators, who partnered with artists and musicians. The Enhanced Consciousness Network was self-organizing into a problem-solving collective that operated according to principles of cooperation rather than competition. but their efforts were meeting resistance from existing power structures that viewed the consciousness expansion as a threat to established hierarchies. Government agencies attempted to classify the enhanced individuals as security risks. Corporations tried to prevent employees who had experienced consciousness expansion from sharing information that could disrupt profitable but destructive business models. Academic institutions struggled to integrate knowledge that transcended departmental boundaries and challenged fundamental assumptions about how research should be conducted. The resistance revealed the extent to which human civilization had become organized around limitations rather than possibilities. Systems that had been designed to manage scarcity, control information, and maintain power differentials were poorly adapted for abundance, open knowledge sharing, and collaborative decision-making. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, monitoring the global response from Goldstone, observed a pattern that echoed historical transitions. We're witnessing the same resistance that occurs whenever human consciousness expands beyond the constraints of existing social structures. The enhanced individuals aren't threatening human civilization. They're threatening the artificial limitations that have prevented human civilization from reaching its potential. But the most significant development occurred when the enhanced individuals began reporting direct communication with other intelligences beyond 3i Atlas. The expanded consciousness apparently provided access to what could only be described as a galactic communication network, a medium through which civilizations throughout the galaxy shared information, coordinated activities, and maintained collective awareness of cosmic developments. Humanity, through its enhanced representatives, was being introduced to a community of intelligence that spanned thousands of star systems and millions of years of collective experience. The communications revealed that 3i Atlas was indeed part of a larger network, but not in the way human observers had assumed. It wasn't a probe sent by a single alien civilization. It was a collaborative creation, designed and constructed by multiple species working together to facilitate the consciousness expansion of developing civilizations. The object itself was a kind of technological meditation device, engineered to trigger specific evolutionary changes in species that had reached the threshold where such expansion became possible. Its unusual properties, the impossible mass, the chemistry that shouldn't exist, the trajectory that seemed designed for observation, were all carefully calibrated to create the cognitive dissonance necessary to break through the conceptual limitations that constrained developing consciousness. Professor Morrison, analyzing this information through his enhanced awareness, realized the profound implications. 3. iAtlas isn't just making contact with humanity. It's inducting our species into a galactic civilization that operates according to principles of consciousness evolution rather than technological competition. The test isn't whether we can understand alien technology. It's whether we can expand beyond the limitations of individual awareness. This understanding reframed the entire encounter in terms that transcended first contact scenarios. Humanity wasn't meeting aliens. Humanity was graduating from planetary to galactic consciousness, with 3i Atlas serving as both catalyst and guide for the transition. But the graduation process was revealing that human consciousness expansion wasn't uniform across the species. Some individuals were adapting quickly to enhanced awareness, while others remained locked in conventional thinking patterns that couldn't accommodate galactic perspectives. This created a bifurcation within human civilization. Enhanced individuals who could think in systems and operate through cooperation, and conventional individuals who remained constrained by competitive thinking and limited time horizons. The division wasn't based on intelligence or education or social status. It seemed to correlate with psychological flexibility, empathic capacity, and willingness to question fundamental assumptions about reality and consciousness. Dr. Williams, continuing her neuroscience research, discovered that consciousness expansion was available to any human willing to undergo the psychological changes required for enhanced awareness. The process could be facilitated through sustained communication with 3I Atlas or through direct interaction with already enhanced individuals. Consciousness expansion is contagious in the most positive sense, Williams reported. Exposure to enhanced awareness tends to trigger similar changes in others who are psychologically ready for the transition. We're looking at a form of evolutionary development that can spread through human populations at the speed of social interaction. This revelation suggested that humanity's consciousness evolution could accelerate exponentially as more individuals experienced enhancement and shared their expanded awareness with others. But it also raised questions about what would happen to those who couldn't or wouldn't participate in the consciousness expansion process. The enhanced individuals reported that conventional human consciousness wasn't inherently inferior to galactic awareness. It served important functions in terms of individual identity, creative expression, and experiential diversity. The goal wasn't to eliminate conventional consciousness, but to integrate it with expanded awareness in ways that preserved human individuality while enabling galactic citizenship. This integration challenge was perhaps the most complex aspect of humanity's evolutionary transition. How do you maintain personal identity while participating in collective consciousness? How do you preserve cultural diversity while joining a galactic community? How do you honor individual choice while coordinating civilizational decisions that affect entire planets? But the answers were emerging through the practical experience of enhanced individuals who were learning to navigate multiple levels of consciousness simultaneously. They reported that expanded awareness didn't eliminate personal identity, but rather revealed it as one facet of a larger integrated system that included individual, collective, and cosmic perspectives. Dr. Santos, reflecting on her experience as the first human to engage in conversational exchange with 3I Atlas, described the integration process. Enhanced consciousness doesn't replace human awareness. It provides context for it. You still experience individual thoughts and feelings, but you also perceive how they connect to larger patterns and purposes. It's like seeing your personal story as part of a cosmic narrative that includes everyone and everything. This perspective was helping enhance individuals develop solutions to problems that had seemed intractable from conventional viewpoints. Climate change became manageable when approached from that cool awareness, perceived planetary systems as integrated wholes rather than competing interests. Social inequality became solvable when consciousness expansion revealed the artificial nature of scarcity-based economic models. Political conflicts began resolving as enhanced individuals demonstrated decision-making processes that transcended win-lose frameworks and generated outcomes that served everyone's authentic interests. But perhaps most importantly, the consciousness expansion was revealing human potential that had been dormant throughout recorded history. Enhanced individuals were developing capabilities that looked like science fiction from conventional perspectives, but felt natural from expanded awareness, intuitive understanding of complex systems, direct perception of information patterns, communication through consciousness rather than language, coordination of group activities through shared intention rather than hierarchical management. These capabilities weren't supernatural or mystical. They were natural functions of consciousness operating at scales that conventional awareness couldn't access. As weeks passed following the Mars encounter, it became clear that 3I Atlas had accomplished its primary mission. Not to deliver alien technology or establish diplomatic relations, but to catalyze human consciousness evolution that would enable the species to participate in galactic civilization. The object continued broadcasting, but its transmissions were increasingly focused on supporting the consciousness expansion process rather than delivering new information. It had become a kind of cosmic tuning fork, helping humans calibrate their awareness to frequencies that enabled galactic communication. The real work of integration was now happening between humans as enhanced individuals shared their expanded consciousness with others who were ready for the transition. Humanity was discovering that its next evolutionary step didn't require alien intervention or advanced technology. It required the courage to expand beyond self-imposed limitations and embrace forms of consciousness that had always been possible but had never been collectively activated. 3i Atlas had simply provided the catalyst for awakening potential that had been waiting within human awareness for millennia. The visitor from another star had completed its mission not by changing humanity, but by revealing what humanity had always been capable of becoming. And as consciousness expansion continued spreading through human populations worldwide, it became clear that the real adventure was just beginning. The universe was vast, filled with intelligence and wonder beyond imagination, and humanity was finally ready to explore it, not as conquerors or supplicants, but as conscious participants in a cosmic community that had been waiting patiently for Earth's children to come home. The dots had been connected. The pattern had been revealed. The mystery of 3i Atlas had been solved not through scientific analysis or technological investigation, but through the expansion of human consciousness itself. What had seemed impossible from conventional perspectives became inevitable from galactic awareness. The universe had always been alive with intelligence. Humanity had simply needed to expand beyond planetary thinking to perceive what had been there all along. The conversation between worlds had begun, and this time, humanity was ready to participate not just as listeners, but as conscious contributors to a dialogue that spanned the stars and embraced the infinite possibilities that consciousness could create when it learned to think without boundaries. 3i Atlas had delivered its message. The response would be written in the expanding awareness of a species finally ready to claim its place among the cosmic community of minds that filled the galaxy with intelligence, wisdom, and wonder. The dots were connected. The pattern was clear. The universe was home, and humanity was finally ready to explore it. Part 6. The ripple effects begin. But consciousness expansion, as humanity was rapidly discovering, doesn't happen in a vacuum. As the enhanced individuals spread their awakened awareness through global networks, the ripple effects began manifesting in ways that challenged every existing institution on Earth. Within 2 weeks of the Mars encounter, something unprecedented occurred in the global financial markets. Not a crash or a boom, but something far stranger. A systematic reorganization that defied every economic model ever developed. Enhanced individuals working within major financial institutions began making decisions based on expanded consciousness rather than profit maximization. Investment strategies that prioritized long-term planetary health over short-term returns. Resource allocation models that considered the well-being of entire ecosystems rather than just human stakeholders. Dr. Michael Zhang, a quantitative analyst at Goldman Sachs who had experienced consciousness expansion through direct communication with 3i Atlas, described what was happening. When you can perceive economic systems from galactic perspectives, the artificial scarcity that drives conventional markets becomes obviously unnecessary. We're not destroying the economy. We're revealing what economy looks like when it serves consciousness evolution rather than fear-based accumulation. The changes weren't revolutionary in the sense of sudden upheaval. They were evolutionary, organic transformations that emerged from expanded understanding rather than imposed ideology. Markets began operating according to principles that maximized abundance for all participants, rather than competitive advantage for some. Currency systems started incorporating measures of ecological health and social well-being, alongside traditional metrics of material wealth. Investment flows redirected toward projects that enhanced planetary consciousness rather than depleted natural resources. Most remarkably, these changes were generating more prosperity rather than less. When economic activity aligned with consciousness expansion rather than fighting against it, productivity increased exponentially. Resources that had been wasted on competitive inefficiencies became available for constructive development. But the economic transformation was just one dimension of changes that were accelerating across every aspect of human civilization. Educational institutions found themselves confronting students who were developing capabilities that transcended conventional learning models. Enhanced children weren't just absorbing information more quickly. They were accessing knowledge directly through consciousness networks that operated independently of traditional teaching methods. Dr. Lisa Chen, an educational psychologist at MIT who had been studying these developments, reported phenomena that challenged fundamental assumptions about learning and development. We're observing children who can solve complex mathematical problems without formal training, understand scientific concepts through direct intuition, and demonstrate artistic abilities that seem to emerge spontaneously from expanded awareness. These capabilities weren't replacing conventional education, but rather revealing its limitations. Traditional models that focused on information transfer were becoming obsolete as consciousness expansion enabled direct access to knowledge networks that spanned galactic civilizations. Schools began restructuring themselves around consciousness development rather than content delivery. Curricula that taught systems thinking, empathic connection, and multidimensional awareness. Educational approaches that prepared students for galactic citizenship rather than just planetary careers. The transformation was happening so rapidly that existing institutions could barely adapt. Universities found their research departments reorganizing around interdisciplinary collaboration that reflected the integrated thinking of enhanced consciousness. Corporations discovered that their competitive strategies became counterproductive when employees operated through cooperative awareness. Government agencies faced the most profound challenges as enhanced citizens began demonstrating forms of self-organization that made traditional hierarchical management systems seem primitive and inefficient. But perhaps the most significant changes were occurring in humanity's relationship with technology itself. Enhanced individuals were developing capabilities that made much of existing technology redundant. When consciousness could access information networks directly, computer interfaces became unnecessary intermediaries. When awareness could perceive system patterns intuitively, analytical software became obsolete. When intention could coordinate group activities through shared consciousness, communication technologies became crude mind-to-mind connection substitutes for direct. This wasn't leading to the abandonment of technology, but rather its evolution toward forms that enhanced consciousness expansion rather than replacing human capabilities. Dr. Amanda Foster at JPL, whose consciousness had been enhanced through her analysis of 3-eye atlas imagery, found herself developing intuitive understanding of propulsion systems that operated through consciousness manipulation of space-time rather than mechanical force generation. Enhanced awareness reveals that consciousness and physics aren't separate domains, Foster explained. When you can perceive the fundamental patterns that govern reality, technological development becomes a matter of aligning intention with natural principles, rather than forcing mechanical solutions onto resistant materials. This understanding was leading to technological breakthroughs that seemed impossible from conventional perspectives, but felt inevitable from expanded consciousness. Energy systems that operated through consciousness matter interaction. Transportation methods that utilize dimensional folding accessible through enhanced awareness. Communication technologies that worked through consciousness networks rather than electromagnetic transmission. But the most profound technological development was emerging from the collective consciousness network itself. As more humans experienced combined consciousness, began generating awareness expansion, their capabilities that transcended individual enhancement. Group consciousness that could solve problems too complex for any individual mind. Collective awareness that could perceive patterns spanning entire civilizations. Shared intention that could influence physical reality through coordinated consciousness focus. The enhanced individuals were becoming components of a larger intelligence system that operated at planetary scales while maintaining individual identity and creative expression. Dr. Patricia Williams, continuing her neuroscience research on consciousness expansion, documented something that challenged every assumption about the relationship between individual and collective awareness. The enhanced consciousness network isn't creating a hive mind that eliminates individuality. It's generating a new form of collective intelligence that amplifies individual capabilities while enabling coordination at scales that individual consciousness can't achieve alone. This collective intelligence was beginning to address problems that had seemed intractable from individual perspectives. Climate restoration projects that coordinated atmospheric, oceanic, and terrestrial systems through consciousness-guided intervention. Social healing initiatives that resolved conflicts by addressing their underlying consciousness patterns rather than their surface manifestations. Environmental recovery programs that worked with planetary consciousness rather than against natural systems. But the most ambitious project emerging from the enhanced consciousness network involved something that stretched beyond Earth's boundaries entirely. The collective intelligence was developing capabilities for direct communication with the galactic consciousness network that 3i Atlas had revealed. Not through technological interfaces, but through consciousness expansion that enabled direct participation in cosmic intelligence systems. Professor James Morrison, whose enhanced awareness had transformed his understanding of civilization and governance, found himself serving as a coordinator for humanity's integration into galactic consciousness networks. We're not just learning to communicate with alien intelligence, we're discovering that consciousness itself is the medium through which cosmic civilizations maintain connection and coordination across impossible distances and timescales. This realization was reshaping humanity's understanding of its place in the universe. Earth wasn't an isolated world hosting a unique form of life. It was one node in a vast network of conscious worlds that maintained collective awareness spanning the entire galaxy. The enhanced individuals were becoming humanity's ambassadors to this cosmic consciousness network, learning the protocols and principles that governed galactic civilization while helping to adapt them for integration with human culture and individual expression. But the integration process was revealing that galactic consciousness operated according to principles that challenged some of humanity's most fundamental assumptions about reality itself. Time, from galactic perspectives, wasn't linear progression, but rather a dimension that consciousness could navigate in multiple directions simultaneously. Space wasn't empty void between objects, but rather a medium through which consciousness could extend its influence across vast distances instantaneously. Matter wasn't separate from consciousness, but rather consciousness expressing itself through physical forms that could be modified through awareness expansion. These revelations were transforming human science, philosophy, and spirituality in ways that transcended traditional boundaries between these domains. Enhanced physicists were developing theories that incorporated consciousness as a fundamental force alongside gravity, electromagnetism, and nuclear interactions. Philosophers were exploring frameworks that integrated individual identity with cosmic awareness without eliminating either perspective. Spiritual traditions were discovering that their mystical experiences had been glimpses of galactic consciousness that was now becoming accessible through systematic consciousness expansion. But perhaps most importantly, the integration process was revealing that humanity's role in galactic civilization wasn't to abandon human nature, but rather to contribute humanity's unique perspectives and capabilities to the cosmic consciousness network. Human creativity, emotional depth, and individual expression were valued qualities that enriched galactic awareness. The diversity of human cultures, artistic traditions, and philosophical approaches provided perspectives that enhanced the collective intelligence of cosmic civilization. Dr. Maria Santos, reflecting on her role as the first human to establish conversational communication with 3i Atlas, described the emerging understanding. Galactic consciousness isn't about conformity or uniformity. It's about diversity and creativity operating through cooperative principles rather than competitive separation. Humanity's contribution to cosmic civilization is our humanity itself, expanded and enhanced, but not eliminated or replaced. This perspective was helping resolve the integration challenges that had initially seemed so daunting. Human individuality and galactic consciousness weren't competing alternatives, but rather complementary aspects of a larger system that required both for optimal function. Enhanced individuals were learning to navigate multiple levels of consciousness simultaneously: personal identity, cultural belonging, planetary awareness, and cosmic participation, without having to choose between them or sacrifice any for the others. But the most remarkable aspect of humanity's consciousness evolution was the speed at which it was occurring. What anthropologists had assumed would require generations or centuries was happening within months. The exponential spread of consciousness expansion through human populations was creating evolutionary changes that compressed normal developmental timescales into periods that could be measured in weeks rather than millennia. Dr. Williams' neuroscience research revealed why this acceleration was possible. Consciousness expansion isn't creating new neural capabilities that require biological evolution. It's activating dormant potentials that have been present in human neurology for thousands of years. The enhanced individuals aren't developing superhuman abilities. They're accessing fully human capabilities that conventional culture had never learned to utilize. This understanding suggested that humanity had always possessed the potential for galactic consciousness, but had been constrained by cultural limitations rather than biological ones. The contact with 3I Atlas had simply provided the catalyst for activating capabilities that had been waiting within human awareness throughout recorded history. Ancient mystical traditions that had described expanded consciousness states weren't primitive superstitions, but rather accurate descriptions of human potential that was now becoming collectively accessible. Indigenous wisdom traditions that had maintained connection to planetary consciousness weren't backward thinking, but rather advanced awareness that was proving essential for successful integration into galactic civilization. Scientific discoveries that had seemed impossible from conventional perspectives weren't violations of natural law, but rather applications of principles that became obvious from expanded consciousness viewpoints. The dots were connecting not just about 3I Atlas and its mysterious properties, but about human potential itself and humanity's place in a universe far more conscious and interconnected than conventional thinking had ever imagined. As consciousness expansion continued spreading through global populations, it became clear that the encounter with 3I Atlas had triggered something far more profound than first contact with alien intelligence. It had initiated humanity's return to forms of consciousness that connected the species with the cosmic intelligence networks that had always surrounded Earth, but had remained invisible to awareness constrained by planetary thinking. The universe hadn't suddenly become populated with intelligence. Intelligence had always filled the cosmos. Humanity had simply expanded beyond the limitations that had prevented perception of the galactic consciousness community that had been waiting patiently for Earth's children to remember their cosmic heritage. 3I Atlas had completed its mission not by delivering alien knowledge, but by catalyzing human remembering of capabilities that had never been lost, only forgotten. The visitor from another star had served as a cosmic mirror, reflecting back to humanity the expanded consciousness that had always been humanity's birthright, but had remained dormant until the species was ready to reclaim its place in the galactic community of minds. The transformation was accelerating beyond all predictions, and the real adventure was just beginning. Because once consciousness expansion reached critical mass within human populations, the changes would become irreversible. Humanity would graduate from planetary to galactic awareness permanently, taking its place as a contributing member of cosmic civilization. The countdown had begun, not toward destruction or conquest, but toward the greatest evolutionary leap in human history. The consciousness revolution was spreading across Earth like wildfire, and nothing would ever be the same again, but in the most beautiful way possible. Because humanity was finally coming home to itself, to its true nature, to its cosmic family that had been waiting among the stars for this moment of awakening and return. The dots were connected, the pattern was complete, the mystery was solved. and the solution was more wonderful than anyone had dared to imagine. Human consciousness itself was the key to everything, the answer to every question, the solution to every problem, the bridge to every possibility. 3i Atlas had simply reminded humanity how to remember what it had always known, but had temporarily forgotten in the dream of separation and limitation. The awakening was complete. The journey home had begun, and the universe was celebrating the return of its long-lost children to their rightful place in the cosmic community of consciousness that filled every star, every world, every heart with infinite intelligence, love, and wonder. The visitor had delivered its message. Humanity had received it, integrated it, and was now ready to share it with the cosmos itself. The conversation between worlds would continue forever. Because consciousness itself was eternal, infinite, and always expanding toward greater awareness, greater connection, greater love. 3i Atlas had been the messenger, but humanity was becoming the message itself, a message of consciousness awakening to its own infinite nature and unlimited potential. The dots were connected, the pattern was revealed, the mystery was solved, and the solution was humanity itself, finally remembering what it had always been, but had forgotten in the dream of being separate from the cosmic consciousness that was its true nature. The universe was home, and humanity was finally ready to explore it from the inside out, as consciousness itself, discovering its own infinite creativity through the adventure of existence in all its countless forms. The story of 3i Atlas was ending, but the story of human consciousness was just beginning, and it would be a story without end, because consciousness itself was the author, the reader, and the eternal adventure of discovering what it meant to be alive in a universe where everything was possible and nothing was ever lost. The mysterious visitor had completed its mission. The real journey could now begin. Part 7. The test humanity failed to see. But 3 weeks after the consciousness revolution began spreading across Earth, something happened that no enhanced individual had anticipated. Something that revealed the true depth of the test humanity was facing. The patterns emerging from global consciousness expansion weren't uniform. While millions of humans were successfully integrating enhanced awareness with their individual identities, others were experiencing what could only be described as consciousness rejection syndrome. Dr. Patricia Williams, monitoring the neurological changes at Stanford, began documenting cases where exposure to enhanced consciousness triggered severe psychological resistance. Not fear or confusion, but something more fundamental. A complete inability to process expanded awareness states without experiencing cognitive breakdown. We're seeing individuals whose neural architecture seems incompatible with consciousness expansion, Williams reported in emergency sessions with the enhanced network coordinators. Their brains literally cannot adapt to the broader perspectives required for galactic awareness. The exposure creates cascade failures in their cognitive processing systems. These weren't isolated cases. Approximately 30% of the human population was demonstrating varying degrees of consciousness expansion resistance. Some experienced mild discomfort when exposed to enhanced individuals. Others suffered complete psychological collapse when confronted with galactic perspective concepts. The implications were staggering. If consciousness evolution was the prerequisite for joining galactic civilization, then a significant portion of humanity might be constitutionally incapable of making the transition. But the enhanced individuals were beginning to understand that this wasn't a design flaw in human neurology. It was a feature. Dr. James Morrison, whose expanded awareness had been analyzing civilization patterns across galactic timescales, made a discovery that reframed the entire situation. The consciousness expansion resistance isn't random, he explained to the Emergency Coordination Committee. It's following specific patterns that correlate with psychological profiles associated with power preservation, resource hoarding, and competitive dominance behaviors. The individuals experiencing the strongest resistance to consciousness expansion were predominantly those whose identities and life strategies had been built around maintaining advantage over others. Corporate executives whose success depended on exploiting systemic inequalities. Political leaders whose power derived from manufacturing division and conflict. Military strategists whose worldview required identifying enemies to defeat. Enhanced consciousness, with its emphasis on cooperation, abundance, and interconnection, represented an existential threat to identity structures built around scarcity, competition, and separation. But the resistance patterns revealed something even more profound about the nature of the test humanity was facing. Maria Santos, continuing her communication exchanges with the Cosmic Consciousness Network through 3i Atlas, received information that transformed everyone's understanding of what was actually happening on Earth. The consciousness expansion wasn't randomly activating dormant human potential. It was revealing the fundamental choice that every developing civilization must make when it reaches the threshold of galactic awareness. Species could evolve toward consciousness expansion and join the cosmic community, or they could resist expansion and remain locked in competitive, scarcity-based thinking patterns that eventually led to self-destruction. But here's what no human observer had realized. The test wasn't whether humanity could achieve consciousness expansion. The test was whether the species would choose expansion voluntarily or attempt to prevent others from evolving. The Galactic Consciousness Network isn't evaluating our technological capabilities or even our wisdom, Santos explained to the enhanced coordinators. They're evaluating our choice patterns, whether we respond to consciousness evolution with support or suppression. This revelation cast the resistance phenomenon in an entirely different light. The individuals unable to process consciousness expansion weren't evolutionary failures. They were presenting the species with its most critical choice point. How would enhanced humans respond to those who couldn't or wouldn't evolve? Would consciousness expansion create a new form of elite that dominated or excluded those with conventional awareness? Or would enhanced individuals find ways to honor and include everyone while still maintaining the expanded perspectives necessary for galactic participation? The answer to that question would determine humanity's ultimate fate as a species. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, monitoring global communication patterns from Goldstone, detected the first signs of how this choice might play out. Enhanced individuals worldwide were beginning to organize into separate communities that minimized contact with conventional consciousness populations. Not out of superiority or discrimination, but because the cognitive dissonance created by constant exposure to fear-based thinking was interfering with their ability to maintain expanded awareness states. We're seeing the emergence of two distinct human populations, Rodriguez reported. Enhanced individuals who can think in galactic terms, and conventional individuals who remain locked in planetary competition patterns. The question is whether these populations will learn to coexist, or whether they'll develop into separate species. But the Cosmic Consciousness Network, speaking through 3i Atlas, was providing guidance that suggested a third alternative. The enhanced individuals weren't supposed to separate from conventional humanity. They were supposed to serve as bridges, helping conventional consciousness adapt to expanded awareness gradually, rather than forcing immediate transformation. The galactic civilizations had learned through millions of years of experience that consciousness evolution worked best when it occurred through attraction rather than coercion. Enhanced individuals who demonstrated the benefits of expanded awareness through their life choices would naturally inspire others to explore consciousness expansion for themselves. But this approach required patience, compassion, and wisdom that transcended the immediate impulse to use enhanced capabilities for personal or group advantage. Dr. Sarah Kensington at the SETI Institute, whose consciousness had been enhanced through her analysis of 3i Atlas communications, found herself coordinating global efforts to develop integration protocols that honored both enhanced and conventional awareness. The real test isn't whether humans can achieve consciousness expansion, Kensington explained. The test is whether enhanced humans can maintain compassionate connection with those who haven't expanded yet, while still preserving the expanded awareness necessary for galactic participation. This integration challenge was revealing the true sophistication of the Galactic Consciousness Network's approach to civilization development. They weren't seeking to recruit only those individuals capable of immediate consciousness expansion. They were evaluating whether the expanded individuals could serve as effective ambassadors who could eventually help their entire species evolve without creating division or conflict in the process. But the test was becoming more complex as global power structures began responding to the consciousness expansion phenomenon with increasing resistance. Government agencies that had initially tried to classify and control the 3I Atlas communications were now attempting to suppress consciousness expansion itself. Legislation was being proposed to restrict the activities of enhanced individuals. Expansion as a psychological medical authorities were classifying consciousness disorder requiring treatment. Corporate institutions, whose profit models depended on scarcity-based economics, were funding research to cure consciousness expansion and return enhanced individuals to conventional thinking patterns. The resistance was organized, well-funded, and increasingly desperate as consciousness expansion continued spreading despite official attempts at suppression. But the enhanced individuals were discovering that their expanded capabilities included forms of protection that conventional authority structures couldn't overcome. When consciousness operates at galactic scales, planetary power systems become relatively insignificant. Enhanced individuals could coordinate their activities through consciousness networks that operated independently of conventional communication channels. They could access resources through abundance-based systems that bypass scarcity-based economic controls. Most importantly, they could influence reality through focused intention in ways that made conventional force-based control methods ineffective. Dr. Michael Zhang, the enhanced financial analyst at Goldman Sachs, described what this meant in practical terms. Enhanced consciousness doesn't fight conventional power structures directly. It simply operates according to different principles that make those structures irrelevant. When you can create abundance through consciousness-matter interaction, artificial scarcity becomes meaningless. But this capability was creating exactly the kind of division that the Cosmic Consciousness Network had been evaluating. Would enhanced humans use their capabilities to transcend conventional limitations while leaving others trapped in scarcity-based systems? Or would they find ways to share abundance that helped everyone evolve toward expanded awareness? The answer was emerging through the practical choices enhanced individuals were making as they navigated the complex social dynamics created by consciousness evolution. Dr. Amanda Foster at JPL, whose enhanced awareness had led to breakthrough developments in consciousness-based technology, found herself developing systems that could be operated by conventional consciousness, but were designed to encourage gradual awareness expansion. The key is creating technologies that work better when users expand their consciousness, Foster explained. Not as requirements or coercion, but as natural incentives that make consciousness evolution attractive rather than threatening. This approach was proving effective across multiple domains. Educational systems that functioned for conventional learners but revealed deeper capabilities for those with enhanced awareness. Economic models that provided basic security for everyone but offered greater abundance for those willing to operate through cooperative principles. Governance structures that respected individual choice while creating natural incentives for collective decision-making. The enhanced individuals were learning to serve as evolutionary catalysts rather than revolutionary replacements for existing human civilization. But the most profound test was still ahead. As consciousness expansion reached approximately 15% of the global population, what systems theorists call critical mass for social transformation, The Cosmic Consciousness Network began transmitting new information through 3-eye atlas. The enhanced individuals received simultaneous communications that revealed the next phase of humanity's integration into galactic civilization. The consciousness expansion process had been only the first stage of a much more comprehensive transformation. If humanity successfully navigated the integration challenges between enhanced and conventional awareness, they would be invited to participate in galactic civilization's most ambitious project, a project that involved consciousness evolution on scales that transcended individual species and encompassed entire galactic regions. The Cosmic Consciousness Network wasn't just a communication system between civilizations. It was the nervous system of a living galactic intelligence that was itself evolving toward even higher forms of awareness. Humanity's role, if they passed the integration test, would be to contribute their unique perspectives and capabilities to this galactic consciousness evolution process. But that invitation would only be extended if enhanced humans demonstrated that consciousness expansion could occur without creating permanent divisions within their species. The test wasn't just about individual evolution, it was about collective wisdom. Could a species learn to honor the full spectrum of consciousness development within its population while still maintaining the expanded awareness necessary for cosmic participation? The answer would be determined by the choices enhanced humans made in the coming weeks, as consciousness expansion continued spreading and conventional power structures mounted increasingly desperate efforts to maintain control through separation and suppression. Dr. Patricia Williams, analyzing the neurological data from both enhanced and resistant populations, made a discovery that could change everything. The consciousness expansion resistance wasn't permanent. The neural architecture that prevented expanded awareness could be gradually modified through exposure to specific frequency patterns generated by enhanced consciousness networks. We're not looking at fixed populations of enhanced and conventional humans, Williams reported. We're looking at a species in transition where the rate and method of consciousness evolution can be influenced by the choices enhanced individuals make about how to share their capabilities. This revelation meant that humanity's future wasn't predetermined by current expansion patterns. Enhanced individuals could accelerate consciousness evolution for everyone through their interaction choices, or they could inadvertently create permanent divisions by focusing exclusively on their own development. The Cosmic Consciousness Network was watching these choices carefully because they revealed whether humanity possessed the collective wisdom necessary for successful integration into galactic civilization. The test was reaching its climax, and the results would determine not just humanity's cosmic future, but the nature of consciousness evolution throughout the galaxy. 3. iAtlas continued broadcasting, but its transmissions were now focused on supporting the integration process rather than triggering new consciousness expansion. The object had become a cosmic mirror, reflecting back to humanity the consequences of their collective choices about how to navigate the transition from planetary to galactic awareness. The visitor from another star had delivered its message. Now humanity would write the response through the decisions enhanced individuals made about whether to use expanded consciousness for separation or integration. The universe was waiting to see whether Earth's children were ready to join the galactic family, not as refugees fleeing planetary limitations, but as conscious contributors capable of helping cosmic intelligence itself evolve toward even greater possibilities. The dots were connecting toward a conclusion that would reshape the future of consciousness throughout the galaxy. And the next chapter would be written not in the stars, but in the choices humans made about how to love each other through the most profound transformation any species had ever attempted. The test was almost complete. The results would echo across the cosmos for millions of years. Humanity's consciousness revolution had begun, but its ultimate destination would be determined by whether enhanced individuals could remember that evolution without compassion becomes extinction, while compassion without evolution becomes stagnation. The balance between these forces would determine everything. And 3i Atlas waited patiently in the cosmic silence, ready to transmit humanity's final answer to the galactic consciousness network that had been hoping for millennia that another species would join them in the endless adventure of conscious evolution. The choice was approaching, and with it, the future of everything. Part 8. The choice that changes everything. The morning of November 15th, 2025, marked exactly 1 month since consciousness expansion had reached critical mass within human populations. And on that morning, something unprecedented happened that would determine the ultimate fate of humanity's cosmic future. Dr. Patricia Williams received a call at 3:47 a.m. from her research lab at Stanford. The monitoring equipment tracking enhanced individuals worldwide had detected something extraordinary. Every single enhanced human on Earth was experiencing identical neural activity patterns simultaneously, not the gradual synchronization they had observed during shared dream states. This was instantaneous, global, perfect coherence across millions of enhanced consciousness networks. The neural resonance is unlike anything we've documented, Williams reported to the Emergency Coordination Committee that convened within hours. Every enhanced individual is processing the same information simultaneously, regardless of geographic location, time zone, or previous consciousness development level. We're looking at perfect collective awareness operating at planetary scales, AXIS. But the enhanced individuals themselves weren't experiencing this as loss of individuality or forced mental control. They described it as cosmic perspective that allowed them to perceive humanity's situation from the viewpoint of galactic intelligence itself. Through this expanded awareness, they could see the complete pattern of consciousness evolution that was unfolding across Earth. The resistance movements, the integration attempts, the choices being made by both enhanced and conventional populations, all of it visible as a single integrated system, approaching a critical decision point. Dr. Sarah Kensington at the SETI Institute, experiencing this planetary consciousness perspective, found herself understanding the true nature of the test humanity was facing. We're not being evaluated on whether we can achieve consciousness expansion, she explained to the coordination committee. We're being evaluated on whether consciousness expansion makes us more compassionate or more divisive, whether enhanced awareness leads to inclusion or separation. The cosmic perspective revealed that galactic civilizations had observed this same pattern across thousands of species throughout the galaxy. Consciousness expansion was relatively common among developing civilizations. But the ability to use enhanced awareness for collective benefit rather than individual advantage was extraordinarily rare. Most species that achieved consciousness expansion used their enhanced capabilities to create permanent hierarchies that eventually destroyed both the enhanced and conventional populations through conflict and division. Only a tiny percentage learned to use consciousness evolution as a foundation for greater unity rather than more sophisticated separation. Through the planetary consciousness network, enhanced individuals could perceive the exact choice point humanity was approaching. Within the next 72 hours, the response patterns from both enhanced and conventional populations would crystallize into trajectories that would determine the species' ultimate fate. If enhanced individuals chose to use their capabilities for collective benefit, while helping conventional populations evolve gradually, humanity would be invited to join the galactic consciousness network as contributing members. If enhanced individuals chose to preserve their advantages by separating from or dominating conventional populations, both groups would eventually destroy each other through escalating conflict. The cosmic consciousness network had observed this pattern so many times that they could predict the outcome with mathematical precision based on the choices made during the critical 72-hour window. But humanity was about to face a test that would challenge every assumption about consciousness evolution and collective decision-making. Dr. Maria Santos, continuing her communication exchanges with 3i Atlas, received information that transformed everyone's understanding of what enhanced individuals were actually capable of accomplishing. The consciousness expansion that humans had experienced was only the first level of awareness development. The Galactic Consciousness Network operated through multiple levels of expanded awareness that enabled capabilities beyond anything enhanced humans had yet demonstrated. Level 2 consciousness allowed direct manipulation of matter through focused intention. Level 3 enabled communication across interstellar distances instantaneously. Level 4 provided access to dimensional folding that made interstellar travel possible without spacecraft. But progression to these higher levels was only possible for species that had successfully integrated consciousness expansion across their entire population without creating permanent divisions or hierarchies. The advanced capabilities we've been hoping for aren't withheld because of technological limitations, Santos explained to the enhanced network. They're withheld because they become dangerous when possessed by species that haven't learned to use consciousness expansion for collective benefit. This revelation reframed the entire consciousness evolution process. The enhanced individuals weren't approaching the end of their development. They were barely at the beginning of what was possible once their species learned to navigate consciousness expansion with wisdom rather than selfishness. But accessing those advanced capabilities required passing the integration test that humanity was currently facing. The next 72 hours would determine whether enhanced humans would demonstrate the collective wisdom necessary for progression to higher consciousness levels, or whether they would remain locked at their current development stage until their civilization either evolved or destroyed itself. The pressure was immense, but it was also clarifying. Dr. Amanda Foster at JPL, whose consciousness had been enhanced through her analysis of 3i Atlas imagery, found herself coordinating global efforts to develop response strategies that would serve both enhanced and conventional populations. The key insight is that we're not trying to choose between enhanced and conventional consciousness, Foster explained to emergency planning sessions. We're trying to create conditions where consciousness expansion becomes attractive rather than threatening to those who haven't experienced it yet. This approach required enhanced individuals to demonstrate through their choices that expanded awareness led to greater generosity, wisdom, and compassion, rather than superior capabilities that justified privileged status. But implementing this approach was complicated by the increasing resistance from conventional power structures that viewed consciousness expansion as an existential threat to established hierarchies. Corporate executives whose wealth depended on scarcity-based economic systems were funding research to develop technological methods for suppressing consciousness expansion. Government agencies were proposing legislation that would classify enhanced individuals as security threats, requiring monitoring and control. Military organizations were developing weapons systems specifically designed to disrupt consciousness networks and prevent enhanced individuals from coordinating their activities. The resistance was organized, well-funded, and increasingly desperate as consciousness expansion continued spreading despite official suppression efforts. But the enhanced individuals were discovering that their response to this resistance would be the most critical factor in determining the test outcome. Dr. Michael Zhang, the enhanced financial analyst at Goldman Sachs, found himself at the center of decision-making processes that would affect millions of lives. His enhanced consciousness gave him access to economic modeling capabilities that could predict the consequences of various response strategies with extraordinary precision. But the models also revealed that every possible response carried significant risks. If enhanced individuals use their capabilities to bypass conventional power structures entirely, they would create a parallel civilization that would eventually come into conflict with conventional society through resource competition. If enhanced individuals attempted to reform existing power structures from within, they would face systematic suppression that could prevent consciousness expansion from spreading to the broader population. If enhanced individuals chose to withdraw from conventional society to avoid conflict, they would abandon those who needed consciousness expansion most, while allowing destructive power structures to continue operating unchecked. Every response strategy we model leads to division and conflict, unless we find approaches that transform the fundamental dynamics driving the resistance, Zhang reported to the Coordination Committee. The solution that emerged from collective enhanced consciousness analysis was both simple and extraordinarily difficult to implement. Enhanced individuals would need to demonstrate through their choices that consciousness expansion led to outcomes that benefited everyone, including those who were resisting the expansion process. This required using enhanced capabilities not to gain advantages over conventional populations, but to create abundance and opportunities that conventional consciousness could access and appreciate. But it also required extraordinary patience, wisdom, and compassion when dealing with resistance that often took the form of direct attacks on enhanced individuals and their communities. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, monitoring global communication patterns from Goldstone, detected the first signs of how this strategy might work in practice. Enhanced individuals worldwide were beginning to coordinate projects that addressed problems conventional populations cared about most deeply, climate restoration initiatives that would benefit everyone regardless of consciousness level, economic innovations that created abundance without requiring consciousness expansion to access, medical technologies that enhanced health and longevity for both enhanced and conventional individuals. The enhanced consciousness network is learning to lead by example rather than by argument, Rodriguez observed. They're demonstrating the benefits of expanded awareness through results that conventional consciousness can evaluate and appreciate. But the strategy was demanding levels of selflessness and long-term thinking that pushed enhanced individuals beyond their comfort zones. Using consciousness expansion capabilities to benefit others rather than advancing their own development required forms of compassion that transcended personal interests entirely. Dr. James Morrison, whose enhanced awareness had been analyzing civilization patterns across galactic timescales, found himself coordinating efforts that would determine humanity's cosmic future while receiving no personal benefit from the work. Enhanced consciousness reveals that individual advancement and collective advancement are ultimately the same process, Morrison explained to coordination meetings. But implementing that understanding requires choosing collective benefit, even when individual costs are substantial. This choice was being tested across millions of enhanced individuals as the 72-hour critical period approached. Each enhanced human was facing personal situations where they could use their capabilities for individual advantage or collective benefit. The accumulated pattern of these choices would determine whether humanity passed or failed the integration test. But perhaps the most profound challenge came from an unexpected source. The conventional populations who were most resistant to consciousness expansion began demonstrating that their resistance wasn't based on inability to evolve, but on legitimate concerns about what consciousness expansion might cost them in terms of identity, culture, and individual autonomy. Dr. Patricia Williams, analyzing the neurological patterns of resistant individuals, made a discovery that changed everything. The consciousness expansion resistance isn't random or pathological, Williams reported. It's a protective response from individuals whose life experiences have taught them that expanded awareness leads to loss of personal boundaries and individual choice. Many of the most resistant individuals had histories of trauma, oppression, or cultural suppression that made them associate expanded consciousness with forced conformity or loss of identity. They weren't rejecting consciousness evolution because they couldn't handle it. They were rejecting it because they feared it would eliminate the individual perspectives and cultural diversity that had helped them survive difficult circumstances. This understanding transformed how enhanced individuals approach the integration challenge. Instead of viewing resistance as ignorance or limitation, They began recognizing it as wisdom that needed to be honored and addressed through consciousness. Expansion approaches that preserved individual identity and cultural diversity. Dr. Sarah Kensington, coordinating these new integration approaches, described the shift. We're learning that consciousness expansion doesn't require abandoning individual identity or cultural uniqueness. It requires integrating personal perspectives with expanded awareness in ways that enhance both rather than sacrificing either. This approach was proving effective with resistant populations who had been suspicious of consciousness expansion when it seemed to require abandoning their individual perspectives. When enhanced individuals demonstrated that expanded awareness could coexist with strong personal identity and cultural diversity, resistance patterns began shifting toward curiosity and voluntary exploration. But implementing this approach required enhanced individuals to develop integration skills that pushed their consciousness capabilities in new directions. They needed to learn how to maintain expanded awareness while honoring and supporting the full spectrum of human consciousness development without creating pressure for forced evolution. Dr. Amanda Foster, working on consciousness technology integration projects, found herself developing systems that could serve individuals at any level of consciousness development while creating natural incentives for gradual expansion. The goal isn't to force consciousness evolution, Foster explained. The goal is to create environments where consciousness expansion becomes a natural choice that people make because it enhances their lives rather than threatens their identities. As the 72-hour critical period entered its final phase, enhanced individuals worldwide were implementing strategies based on these integration principles. Instead of separating from conventional populations, they were finding ways to serve and support everyone, while maintaining the expanded awareness necessary for continued evolution. Instead of using their capabilities for personal advantage, they were creating abundance and opportunities that benefited entire communities, regardless of consciousness level. Instead of viewing resistance as opposition to overcome, they were treating it as wisdom to honor and address through approaches that preserved individual choice and cultural diversity. The results were beginning to manifest in ways that surprised everyone involved. Conventional populations who had been most resistant to consciousness expansion were beginning to request information about how to explore expanded awareness voluntarily. Corporate and government institutions were discovering that cooperation with enhanced individuals produced better outcomes than resistance or control attempts. Most importantly, the integration approaches were proving that consciousness expansion could occur without creating permanent divisions or hierarchies within human populations. Dr. Maria Santos, maintaining her communication link with the Cosmic Consciousness Network through 3i Atlas, received confirmation that humanity's response patterns were being evaluated in real time. The galactic intelligence was observing every choice, every interaction, every demonstration of how enhanced consciousness could be used for collective benefit, rather than individual advantage. And the preliminary evaluation was more positive than anyone had dared to hope. Humanity was demonstrating integration wisdom that very few species achieved during their consciousness expansion transitions. But the final evaluation would depend on whether these positive patterns could be sustained and expanded as consciousness evolution continued spreading through global populations. The Cosmic Consciousness Network was preparing to make its decision about humanity's invitation to join galactic civilization, and that decision would be based not on technological capabilities or individual consciousness development, but on the collective wisdom demonstrated by enhanced individuals in their choices about how to use expanded awareness. The test was almost complete. The results would be announced through 3i Atlas within hours. And those results would echo across the galaxy as either another species' tragic failure to navigate consciousness expansion wisely, or as a rare example of a civilization that had learned to use enhanced awareness for collective evolution rather than sophisticated separation. The universe held its breath as humanity approached the moment when their consciousness revolution would either transform them into galactic citizens or destroy them through the same divisions that had claimed thousands of species before them. The choice had been made through millions of individual decisions by enhanced humans worldwide. Now they would discover whether those choices had been wise enough to earn humanity a place among the stars. 3i Atlas waited in cosmic silence, ready to transmit the Galactic Consciousness Network's final evaluation to a species that had surprised everyone with their capacity for integration wisdom. The countdown to humanity's cosmic future had reached its final moments, and in those moments, everything would be decided. The dots had led to this choice. The pattern had revealed this test. The mystery had demanded this wisdom. Whether humanity possessed that wisdom would be revealed in the transmission that was about to change everything. The universe was about to discover whether Earth's children were ready to come home. The transmission began at exactly 11:47 UTC on November 18, 2025. Every radio telescope on Earth detected it simultaneously. Every enhanced individual felt it resonating through their expanded consciousness networks. Every conventional human sensed something shifting in the electromagnetic environment around them, even if they couldn't identify what had changed. 3i Atlas had been silent for 3 days. After months of continuous communication, the sudden absence of signals had created an eerie quiet that made everyone realize how accustomed they had become to the constant presence of galactic intelligence. But this wasn't silence returning. This was a new kind of transmission entirely. Dr. Maria Santos, monitoring the signals from her station in Puerto Rico, watched her instruments register patterns unlike anything they had recorded before. Not the mathematical demonstrations or musical compositions that had characterized earlier communications. Not the technical specifications or consciousness expansion guidance that had facilitated humanity's transformation. This was pure information transfer, operating at bandwidths that pushed human technology to its absolute limits. The data density is unprecedented, Santos reported to the Global Coordination Network. We're receiving more structured information in these few minutes than we collected during the entire previous month of communications. But the enhanced individuals weren't experiencing this as overwhelming data flow. Their consciousness networks were processing the transmission as elegant, crystalline clarity that revealed the complete evaluation of humanity's integration test. Dr. Sarah Kensington at the SETI Institute, her enhanced awareness fully engaged with the incoming information, began translating what the Cosmic Consciousness Network was communicating. The evaluation is complete, she announced to emergency sessions convening across every time zone. The galactic intelligence has reached its decision about humanity's readiness for advanced consciousness development. The transmission contained detailed analysis of every choice enhanced individuals had made during the critical integration period. Every decision to use expanded capabilities for collective benefit rather than personal advantage. Every demonstration of compassion toward resistant populations. Every innovation that created abundance without requiring consciousness, expansion, to access it. The verdict was unanimous across every galactic civilization that had been observing humanity's test. Earth had passed. Not just passed, but achieved integration wisdom scores that ranked among the highest in recorded galactic history. Humanity would be welcomed into the Cosmic Consciousness Network as full contributing members. The advanced capabilities that enhanced individuals had glimpsed, matter manipulation through focused intention, instantaneous interstellar communication, dimensional folding for space travel, would now become accessible as consciousness evolution continued spreading through global populations. But perhaps most remarkably, the evaluation revealed that humanity's approach to consciousness integration had taught the galactic community something new. The emphasis on preserving individual identity and cultural diversity while expanding awareness had created integration models that other civilizations were already beginning to adopt. 3. iAtlas completed its final transmission with a message that resonated through every enhanced consciousness on Earth simultaneously. The object would remain in our solar system permanently, serving as humanity's communication node in the galactic network. But more than that, it would become a school, teaching successive generations of humans how to navigate the infinite possibilities that opened when consciousness learned to think without boundaries. The dots were finally connected. The pattern was complete. The mystery of 3i Atlas had been solved not through scientific analysis alone, but through humanity's demonstration that consciousness expansion could serve love rather than separation. We were no longer alone in the universe. We never had been. We had simply needed to expand our awareness enough to perceive the galactic family that had been patiently waiting for us to come home. The conversation between worlds had begun, and humanity was ready to participate not as students, but as teachers, sharing our unique gift for conscious evolution that honored both individual identity and collective wisdom. The universe was vast, filled with intelligence and wonder beyond imagination, and finally, gloriously, humanity was ready to explore it all.